don't know.
You have to start the webinar to see if he's in the attendees.
Okay, so I'll start that. All right, you're good to go.
All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome you to the February 23rd public hearing of the Finance, Revenue, and Bonding Committee. My name is Sean Scanlon. I'm the House Chair of the committee. Any opening remarks from the ranking members this morning before we get started?
No, looking forward to hearing about this bill. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I'm good.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I am good to go. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Senator. Without further ado, I would ask if Commissioner Lehman is here this morning.
Representative Scanlon, I just received a call from the commissioner's office. He's having some technical difficulties, so I'll have to resend him the link. You're calling if you want to see if the next person's here, but I'm going to mute myself and go resend him the link.
That's fine. Is Randy Collins here from CCM or Senator Summers?
Just added Randy Collins.
Okay. Good morning, Randy.
Good morning. I wasn't exactly ready to hit lead off, but I will do my best. CCM, we're here today. Yeah, I think we are in a position to support House Bill 6468, an act concerning incentives for qualified data centers, which would establish an enabling process allowing qualified data centers that meet the criteria listed in the bill to receive tax exemptions under chapters 203, 219 of the general statutes. From CCM's perspective, really we talked from the municipal side and some of the concerns that we had and that we've been working through with Commissioner Lehman. It's important to note that this bill would not be a mandate on towns and cities and that no qualified data center under this bill would be able to begin construction or operation with the exemption provided unless they sign an MOU regarding a host fee agreement where the facility is located. That MOU is not a one-size-fits-all. It will be subject to each town can chart their own course of what they think is adequate compensation to allow this to happen. CCN has been working, as I said, with Commissioner Lehman over the last week and proponents of the bills to improve aspects of the language and strengthen certain municipal protections. I have sent my testimony. Most importantly, we wanted language that in the event that a qualified data center failed to meet the terms of the MOU, I think we're going to provide that there's a 6-month cure to rectify that situation. If that doesn't occur, the tax exemptions under 203, the property tax exemptions, those exemptions would go away. The property would then be subject to taxation, and municipalities would have all remedies granted under general statute to secure any taxable revenue or compensation due from the time that the MOU wasn't satisfied, including the application of priority liens, which are an important tool to municipalities. We've also asked for additional language. Currently, the bill states that provided any additional building qualified data center to be developed, acquired, constructed, rehabilitated would be exempt, even if that was not contemplated at the time of entering into the agreement. We're waiting to see language that this does not apply to the acquisition of additional real property, so that one of these qualified data centers couldn't just continue to buy additional parcels of land without either modifying the existing MOU or entering into a new MOU for additional real property. We've also excluded, we've asked for the exclusion of motor vehicles from the property tax exemptions, just to make sure that motor vehicles from outside of, are not being, cited on this, especially during the construction process, that we're not taking these motor vehicles from different municipalities, registering to this qualified data center and then having them be excluded from the property taxation. CCM, the broader economic aspects of this, that's a discussion that you can have with Commissioner Lehman and the administration. But from CCM's perspective, we just wanted to ensure that these additional protections were in place for our towns. There is some question about the 30-year frame, but that's for a town to determine if that's the the chart, the path that they want to go down. And that, as I said, we're here to make sure that we have protections that I've listed. And I think we've reached an agreement. And if that language is satisfied, that CCM will be in a position to support the bill. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Collins. Senator Wickos.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Randy, I wanted to get a clarification when you were talking about the motor vehicle exemption. Did you say should not be tax exempt or should be tax exempt for vehicles?
Should not be. That motor vehicles would be excluded from the tax exemption provisions within the bill.
Okay, very good. I agree. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Chair. I was having
Representative Cheeseman.
I don't know why. I'll start.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Randy. So obviously, from your point of view, this is a work in progress in terms of seeing the language you want. Questions with regard to infrastructure. We obviously, we see the exemption from sales and use tax, and subject to the MOU, the possible exemption from property tax. What in terms of infrastructure, let's say sewering, additional security, would this be a matter for the town to negotiate with the developer of the data center? How do you see that playing out?
I think if there were, fees that were related to sewer fees, hopefully stormwater fees at some point and for certain municipalities, that would be subject to negotiation with the developer in the MOU. The physical, the building obviously would be what would be subject to property tax exemption. So I think a town would have to look and say, okay, if you're looking at a $400 million investment in terms of the building and the technical equipment that goes within that, okay, what would be at current rates if it was liable for, $5 million, $9 million a year in taxation? Would that developer say, okay, we'll provide you with $1 million a year? And that's what towns would have to determine. If this qualified data center didn't come and takes that $1 million a year that they're offering, what would a town have to put into that location that would generate that type of revenue for a town? And again, these are 30 years is a long time. And it's really hard to kind of wrap your head around what could happen in 30 years. But for some towns, I think that would be too much. And they'll say, you know what, it's not worth it for us to lock into for 30 years. But another town may say, hey, we don't see any economic development opportunity coming here that could match this. And it's a deal that they're willing to take. Then we don't want to tell a town that we don't want to take an opportunity off the table. But at the same point, we're very clear that the developer would have to reach an agreement with a host fee agreement, an MOU with that town. So we look at this is an opt-in, and allowing our towns to chart their course as they best see fit.
Okay, and one final question. You talked about that cure period. If the developer data center did not live up to the requirements of the MOU, there would be a 6-month cure period from the time at which it became obvious they were not living up to their requirements. So they put in 150 million instead of 200 million, say we're done. That's the point at which that would kick in and you would say, hey guys, you got to fix this, and then just expound on that. And also in terms of your position as far as a lien holder.
Well, if this developer put in 150 instead of the 200 million, that would actually be a fault with the state, where the municipality, if you broke that MOU, if they were promising $1.2 million a year and a monthly payment of $100,000. So if they failed to meet that $100,000 payment to the municipality, that we would provide, as I said, that 6-month cure period. So, we wouldn't want to see a town day one, bang, oh, you missed your payment. I'm moving to put everything onto the books. We do want to provide a little bit of, leeway for them to get their house in order. But after that 6-month period, which is, I believe, what we worked out with Commissioner Lehman, he can speak to it as well, that after that 6-month period, if they had failed to meet that, as I said, that obligation under the terms of the MOU, which could vary, that at that point, the exemptions would the property tax exemptions would be removed. The full property would be subject to taxation, that's currently within the statute. And And then if they don't meet the tax payments, which would be substantial on, on investments that we're hearing $300-400 million, that a municipality then could file a lien on the property, just like we would any other taxpayer for failure to pay property taxes. And,
Thank you, Randy. Thank you
and
very
that, that lien is a priority lien, so it puts us at the front of the line. So,
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Randy. Thank you, Chairman Scanlon.
Representative Nuccio.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Chairman. Good morning, Randy. How are you?
how are you? Nice to meet you virtually.
Nice to meet you too. So I have a couple of questions. I'm a little concerned on, or maybe I just need some clarification. For the portion of this bill that is in relation to the town property taxes, every town, or most towns that I know of anyway, have some sort of abatement process in their current authority. So what is the desire or the need to have this in this bill? Because I do agree with you. Some of the terms that are in here are a little scary for a municipal town to be looking at. 30 years is, I agree with you, far too long to even be talking about any kind of abatement program for a town. And you brought up a very good point that on a $4 million building, depending on your mill rate, you could be looking at an $8 or $9 million tax on that. And the host fee in lieu of taxes could be something that would be damaging over a long period of time. So,
Signing into YouTube
oh,
and
sorry.
confirming
So
passwords
what's your
and-
feeling from the cities and towns that you've spoken to in why this language is in the bill and whether or not you think it's needed from the town perspective?
So from what we have learned, and then I have reached out to a number of the towns that we're hearing that these types of facilities are being, a lot of them are located in Eastern Connecticut, that they would be considered, is while they're, as I said, I think everyone has a little bit of hesitancy when you're signing, you're talking 30 years. But as we've learned that this is fairly much, that this is industry standard is for that 30 years, because given the scope of construction, given the amount of money that would be put into it, it's very much a spreadsheet for these developers, and they need to be able to look out at that, over 30 years. If I'm putting in $400 million plus upgrades that'll have to occur, obviously think of the technology, that will be changing over the years. They want the stability and the predictability to know that they can recoup that 30 or 40, $300-400 million investment, what it may be. So that's why they're looking for a long-term deal, just given the size of that investment. And I know with some of the tax abatement programs, I just don't know if they provide enough comfort to these developers. So I think that is why this is being considered. I think initially this bill came to us in 2019. We had a number of conversations. We had a couple of conversations in 2019. Then obviously with COVID, it dissipated, and now we're back. Initially, the proponents were looking for 50-year abatements, and we thought that was just, if we think 30 was too long, we thought 50 was even beyond what we could really wrap our heads around. So, we saw the 30, and when we've talked to the towns, yes, they'd like a little bit more flexibility than the 30 years, but I think they're also, most of the towns that I have talked to, which is Groton, Montville, Norwich, is that without that 30 years good, but without it, they don't think that the investment opportunity will present itself. So, but again, it's from a CCM perspective and our municipal perspective, this is a deal that, towns will have to take a very hard look at and determine if it's right for them. And if it's not, they have every opportunity to say, no, thank you. And we feel that there's better economic opportunities and development opportunities out there beyond the qualified data centers. We truly think that this is, it is just a tool that a town can use if the opportunity presents itself. And if they don't like that, then or they're not comfortable with the terms, and they don't have to, avail themselves of it. But, as I said, for some towns, maybe 30 years is too much, but another town might look at that and say, you know what, we don't have a lot of other opportunity, we don't see anything else coming close to bringing this type of revenue into a town. So we're going to take that chance and take that deal. It's, you know, what local leaders will have to determine with their residents and their own elected officials.
Yeah, I do think it does cause some bias having it in the law for the towns. But you brought up another good point there. Any investment in upgrades through that 30-year period would not be beneficial to the towns either, because once you're in the MOU, I would assume the host fee, it would be non-negotiable for that time period.
I've seen some of the draft. I've seen like a kind of a sample MOU of what these agreements can look like. And as these data centers expand, if they're doing 16, and I have to admit, you know, I like to refer to myself as a simple country lobbyist. And when I first heard hyperscale data centers, I have no idea what you're talking about. I'm struggling through a Zoom world here. And that, you know, when they're looking at 16 megawatts of data processing and 32 megawatts, a lot of the structure that we've seen is as these qualified data centers grow and develop, your MOU can be structured. So if they expand within that site and their capacity, that the host fee agreement would provide at 16 megawatts, you're getting $500,000 a year. If they move up to 32 megawatts, your structure might now say, okay, you've reached this capacity, now it's $1 million a year. So that a town can structure that to anticipate growth within these data centers to provide additional revenue as they develop and they grow out. So it really is, you know, in the end, I mean, I'm sure a lot of lawyers are going to make a lot of money and working out these host fee agreements. This type of statute, I believe, exists in about almost 20 other states. So there will be, you know, precedent and ideas of where towns, municipalities can go, working with CCM, working with DECD to understand what is reasonable that they can ask for and what they think that they can get. And again, if they don't come to an agreement that they think is beneficial to the town, they just say no. And they can, nothing, you know, right now we have nothing, we're not putting any money on the table. And if the opportunity presents itself, then the town has the ability to avail itself. And if it doesn't, then we're not, you know, we don't lose anything. So it's an option that's out there for towns. And we think, you know, as I said, we never want to take an option off the table. We'd rather give it to the town.
Yeah, I think I'm just a little uncomfortable with the town language being in the state bill, but because that also gets back to what Representative Cheeseman was saying, when you're talking about sewer fees and water fees, if you are abating those for a large building or even reducing those for a large scale building like that in a town, those fees don't go away. So that means it's being spread over the rest of the taxpayers, the increase in use for that. So that's something that I think again, just kind of brings us down the whole the town tax road here, but thank you for your feedback. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Somebody who is representative with their screen off, I can't actually see their name, so unmask yourself. Oh, it's Representative Ziogas. You're up. You got to unmute yourself, though.
Okay, good morning. Am I all right now?
Yep.
Okay. Bristol has a unique problem, I think, because we are host to ESPN. And ESPN has a huge amount of what we would think to be data centers because of video, I think, falls into the category of data. And so I think our concern is that as they make improvements each year, and they are substantial improvements, would they fall under this statute, and then gives them a certain amount of negotiating ability they don't currently enjoy, which would probably be at Bristol taxpayers' expense. So I'm wondering what your interpretation of that might be, Mr. Lehman, wherever you are. Is the commissioner still here?
Yeah, no, I'm here. I just want to make sure it's appropriate for me to answer questions.
It's not. So Chris, if we can keep that for the next witness, that'd be great. If you have questions for Mr. Collins, we can ask him.
Okay.
We'll Mr. Lehman is next to present.
I'm sorry. My apologies.
Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hi, Randy. Hey, Randy, going back to the negotiations with the MOUs and the 20-year, 30-year I said, I guess if we write this into statute, are we obligated to hold to a 20-year term or 30-year tax abatement, or can that be negotiated? Can that be negotiated? So let's say the city only wants to do 10 years or 15 years, or are we going to be locked in? Will the municipalities be locked into a 20 or 30-year without negotiations, being able to negotiate the 20-year or 30-year term?
Our understanding that within the bill, that length of period, it will be set. So it would be, so the MOU that you would sign would be for that 30-year period. And so it would be for the 30-year period, because again, that's providing the predictability that we're continually hearing that this type of development needs. And I certainly would defer to Commissioner Lehman on the needs of these types of developers. Again, that this is, I want to be clear that this is not a CCM bill, but that we have been, but we do have, local concerns with it, and that the negotiations that we've had and the concerns that we've had are providing for those protections. The overall economic policies of this, I would certainly leave to Commissioner Lehman to answer better than I could for you. But we're just, at a local side, we're saying, hey, within the scope of the bill, within the parameters that we've been shown and the discuss and the changes that we've looked at, that puts us into a position where we can support it. Certainly the overall economic policy of this, that's something that the committee and the legislature and the administration can have that discussion. So I would rather defer that question to Commissioner Lehman.
All right, thank you. I have another question regarding your conversations with either small towns or cities regarding this bill. What impact do you think, I guess, the municipal services that might be required because of some maybe specialty apparatus or equipment for safety reasons? I can envision, $50 million investment. And if you're going to be investing a $200 or $300 million investment, and the size of these buildings, and I guess my concern would be is about if I was a mayor or first selectman, is okay, what impact is that going to be on my services in order to provide a safe, that we're called for any emergency, that we have the right safety equipment to deal with it. Were there any type of discussions with the towns regarding that?
Well, one of the things that I think we've discussed is if you're going to have this type of bill, these are all subject to local zoning and the zoning process. So they would have to conform to, zoning approval that towns have. And if you look and say, okay, they want to build a building that is X size, does our public safety infrastructure meet that? If not, then I can look to the developer and say, hey, you know what? I need a new ladder truck within my local fire department to do that. And I can include that within the scope of the MOU to say, I want, to ensure that there's a safety aspect incorporated beyond whatever those fee agreements are, that there's also provision that every 5 years I get a new fire truck. I mean, I think that's, as I said, that's what we're leaving up to the towns to determine what they need to make this work. And if it's a sewer agreement, we want X amount of money for, the town can say, we want X amount of money in lieu of property taxes. Additionally, we need X amount of money, to ensure that our public safety infrastructure is in place. But these are going to be negotiated on a town by town basis, that and they will determine what they need to, one, feel that they're adequately compensated for the tax revenue that would be exempted, but also to ensure that we have safe, it's either safe roads, fire safety, whatever those may be. But as I said, because I haven't seen what one of these buildings would look like, that'd be something as a town can go through the zoning process, the application process for the builds. Are we are our needs being addressed? I mean, and there could be ancillary benefits because, hey, this developer is going to provide funding for an additional fire apparatus. Well, that fire apparatus may never be used at that, for that building, but it certainly doesn't mean it's not going to be used for our other residents in the case of a fire, public safety emergency. So that's how I think we can look at this of, how towns can benefit beyond just, okay, what can we grab from in lieu of property taxes, but what other, ancillary benefits can we get out of this?
Okay, all right, great. Thanks for clarifying that. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you, Randy, for being here this morning. And next we'll go to Commissioner Lehman. Commissioner, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Representative, and great to be here today. I appreciate, sorry for being a bit late, and I know Randy went through a lot of detail, so happy to answer all the questions that came up and others that might be posed here. So I submitted written testimony. I don't want to repeat that, but let me just briefly summarize what I think the opportunity is here for the state of Connecticut. The data industry has been around for 20 or 30 years, perhaps a bit longer in certain places, but this is an industry that has grown significantly, and we expect to continue to grow at a compound growth rate that could be 2 or 3x the broader economy or the state economy. So it's a higher growth industry, certainly as we sit here on Zoom and the cloud, the need for data is going to continue to increase. And we think Connecticut should be taking part in this opportunity and have a very robust data infrastructure to serve companies as well as ultimately, residents of the state as we think about the future. The opportunity here that we're talking about with this specific legislation, this legislation mirrors, I think there are upwards of 30 states that have somewhat similar data center enabling legislation that has similar incentives as it relates to sales and use tax. All of them may look a little different, but there have been states that have leaned in to this industry and really encourage data centers. And we think it's time for Connecticut to do the same. We think there are benefits that are adjacent to certain industries we have in Connecticut, like financial services, as well as attracting a bigger technology and information technology industry. So, to do that, you need to have legislation that looks similar to what's being proposed here, in our opinion. Unlike, my view on other incentives, this is truly a market where if you don't have legislation that makes it very clear as it relates to sales and use tax abatement, how property tax is going to work, you're not going to have the investment. And as a result, Connecticut has not had this legislation, and we have not had an industry, a significant industry to date in data centers. So I'm here today to advocate for us embracing this type of legislation, to embrace this high growth industry, and one I think that will continue to grow in the future and provide direct benefits, specifically even with the abatements that we're proposing here. The direct benefits are significant grandless growth, in my opinion, for municipalities that host some of these centers, as well as a significant amount of jobs. In particular, these centers, typical data centers, can run upwards of 250 or 300 million, some of them even more than that to build. And you can have labor costs that are 75 or 100 million of that. So significant amount of wage revenue and corresponding tax revenue that will be taxed. And some of these centers can have 1,000 or more jobs that are needed to construct them over an 18 or 24-month period. And I would encourage the committee to think about this not as a 1 or 2 data center deal, but really we're trying to enable an industry here. And I think that is really important as we think about the next 10, 20 years for the state. Happy to answer questions. I would say generally the protections and discussions that Randy mentioned, we are going to incorporate them in terms of the next turn of the draft. So there will be updated language, hopefully later today or soon after this meeting, that provide additional protections to municipalities. For example, if there is non-payment under the host agreement, that municipalities basically have the same rights they do as it relates to all other commercial property in their district if there was non-payment of a tax. So we are going to enhance the bill, and that language will be circulated shortly. Last thing I will say is, one of the unique opportunities that we have, and I think you'll hear later from one of the coalition members, but the stock exchanges in the country are potentially looking for a new home or a new home. And Connecticut, we think, could be well suited to be the home of the exchanges. Again, we have a significant finance, investment management industry, significant insurance industry, and we think the exchanges being here in Connecticut will be complementary to those industries. This is a business that's speed is very important and computing power is very important. And we think Connecticut has a lot of the strengths and what's needed in this legislation, specifically as it relates to the exemption from any future financial transactions tax is what's needed to further that conversation with the exchanges and help make them realize that Connecticut is a great place for them to be. And we think that there would be significant direct jobs from that, certainly in the construction fields and beyond. But I also think there is a significant indirect benefit, both in terms of white and blue collar jobs, if that significant investment is to be made. But again, this is not about a specific project or a specific company. This is about enabling an industry that we think is high growth that will pay dividends for the state well into the future. So I'll stop there for the committee, and happy to answer all the questions that I see lined up.
Thank you, Commissioner. Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Chairman Scanlon. Thank you for coming here today. Commissioner Lehman, you've certainly been making the rounds. Question, obviously you've been concentrating on the financial services sector and exchanges. I know Ohio has had a very aggressive program to woo the Facebooks, the Amazons of this world. Would this apply to similar data centers? Were they to indicate an interest in locating in Connecticut?
Yes, is the short answer. So, the big users of data centers are some of the biggest tech companies like Facebook, like Apple, Google, Amazon, and they will continue to be bigger users as the cloud continues to grow significantly. So those types of users will be tenants most likely in the data centers, just like the financial firms could be tenants as well.
And so the financial transactions tax 148 through 159, that this would be, the prohibition against imposing a financial transactions tax would be incorporated in the agreement. Can we do that? Can you tie the future, the future hands of the legislature? And how does, my understanding is we can't. So how does this play out?
Yeah, no, and just to be very clear, I'm not proposing tying the hands of the legislature. What we are proposing in the lines that you cited, though, is for the commissioner of DECD, conditioned on a $400 million or more investment by a qualified data center, to be able to enter into a contractual arrangement with that data center owner and its co-location tenants, whereas the center would benefit for that contractual period. Again, the sales and use tax exemption, the host fee in lieu of property tax, in addition to the exemption from a future financial transactions tax. So if the legislature, to your example, does put in place a financial transactions tax, which I think is a very bad idea, but if that does happen in the future, this contract would insulate those that made that investment from that tax until the 30-year period is out.
Okay, thank you. And you answered a lot of my questions in our previous conversations, and I know there are people lined up. So I want to thank you again for coming here today. Thank you for answering our questions, and thank you, Chairman Scanlon.
Thank you, Representative. Senator Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Commissioner, and also thank you for the time that you took with me earlier to answer most of my questions. And Dave, Commissioner, I just want you to just clarify for the members of the committee here regarding the qualified investments for each of someone, one of these developers come in, or a data center wants to come into Connecticut, regarding their $50 million investment versus their $200 million investment versus a $400 million investment.
Yes, thank you, Senator. So there are two flavors of what we're proposing. If you are in an opportunity zone or an enterprise zone, to get a 20-year abatement, it would be a $50 million minimum investment. And outside of those zones, it would be a $200 million minimum investment. So the intent there was to have a lower bar to encourage sticky investments, capital investments, as well as job creation in our areas that need it the most. And then if a data center operator and builder wants a 30-year investment, then it's a $200 million minimum in an enterprise zone or opportunity zone, and it's a $400 million investment outside of an enterprise zone or an opportunity zone. So you get the incremental 10 years with that incremental capital investment.
Sorry for that interruption.
No problem.
Could you just explain to the group as well as to the total taxes? I know I asked you earlier, where we would be, there would be no taxes on any materials for the construction of the project. And then at certain levels of the $200 million or $400 million, some of the data transactions would not be taxed. And then I also asked you regarding the operational side of it. Can you explain that to the group?
Sure. So the way that I think about this at a high level in terms of what benefits the state's getting from this legislation, even with its exemptions, one, as Randy mentioned previously, these are significant investments, and even at a abated or discounted property tax or fee in lieu of property tax, host municipalities can create, in my opinion, a very significant annuity stream. So grand list growth is very much in play here for our municipalities. In addition, the income tax off all of the jobs, the construction jobs, in addition to the jobs upon stabilization, that will be taxed at normal Connecticut rates. There will be no incentives for that. And because of the construction and labor costs, that is significant in construction. And again, these are just the direct benefits. So those are the two main benefits. I would argue that there are indirect benefits that we should reap in the future if this industry does develop here. Again, jobs that service data centers or other white collar jobs that want to be proximate to the data centers as a result of their business. So those are the benefits we get in terms of the operations of the data center. Well, let me talk about what we're giving up. We are not getting sales and use tax for a 20 or 30 year period on any of the building costs around a data center, on any of the equipment in the data center, and any of the services and goods that are required to run the data center. And the way that I think about this is it truly is a question of, is this an industry that we want to embrace in the state? And my answer is unequivocally yes there. But if we don't, other states have done this. There's a well-trodden path in terms of this type of legislation. And because this is such a capital-intensive industry, and I think about this similar to manufacturing, to be competitive to get these projects, you're not able to put a standard 6.35% sales tax on all those costs that we typically would do. Not dissimilar from what the state does with manufacturing equipment, where we do not tax that. I think that is effectively what I'm proposing here, what we're proposing here with respect to this for a defined period. But operationally, when the data center is up and running, you'll have very significant capital investments where the owners will be updating computers and servers every 3 or 4 years. There's going to be lots of engineering, data administrative jobs. Again, it's around 50 upon each center, plus or minus, once it's stabilized. But again, I think the benefits are you see an industry grow and you see more indirect jobs as a result of that industry too over time.
Thank you for that, clarifying that. Just one last question, Commissioner, regarding the role of DCD during this process, and once the project is completed and they're up and running, what will the role of DCD be?
So I want to answer one of the questions that I think was posed to Randy on this in my response. So DCD, we will create a new office that is effectively a liaison and interface with the developer to also work with the towns as it relates to these projects, help with permitting where we can, to really, again, to make sure there's kind of expedited project and project response. What DC is going to be doing administratively, though, is we're going to make sure that if 200 million were to be spent to get the 20-year abatement, or 400 million for the 30-year abatement, that those costs truly are spent to make sure that the state is getting the deal that it signed up for. And if for some reason, and the way the legislation reads is there's a 5-year period with which to build the data center and spend that money. And if for some reason it's not spent and the developer doesn't hold their end of the bargain, there is a recapture mechanism that's in place. And DCD will make sure that the money's spent, and if need be, recapture it. And that's beyond the town recapture mechanism, which is also going to be in place.
Will the DCD have a role after it's all done regarding that sort of final audit, so to speak? They spent their 200 million. Is there any role after that that you guys will be playing in?
Other than monitoring and continuing to work with our municipal CEOs, no. But I'd like DCD's broad role to encourage investment and business in the state. I'd like to think if we can emulate what happened in Northern Virginia, for example, which is one of the biggest data center markets, we'll be talking to our big data center customers just like we do our big and small businesses in the state.
Good. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Ziogas, followed by Representative Nuccio.
Yes, hi, good morning. Maybe now would be more appropriate time to address my question to you than it was earlier, sorry. Bristol has a special concern because we have ESPN. And I'm thinking it's considered a data center, given I think video is considered data under most definitions. So my assessor is very concerned that we might fall into this statute, and that it gives ESPN a different negotiating position than they might have had currently. So I wasn't sure what your thoughts were.
Yeah, so data center is defined, I believe, on lines 38 of the legislation, you know, what exactly a qualified data center means. But let's assume that what ESPN's doing, Representative, does meet that definition for argument's sake right now. As Randy mentioned before, municipal CEOs and their town managers, assessors, they have the unilateral right to say, we're not going to negotiate a host fee, or we're going to ask for full taxes, or they could ask for twice taxes if they wanted to. So the municipalities are fully empowered to encourage and negotiate a lower rate, or they don't have to. It will be a competitive process like everything else is, but that power is still with the municipality if it qualifies. And if it doesn't qualify or it's below the thresholds, then it's as if with ESPN as it's always been.
Not that I want to argue with you over that, but ESPN's our #1 taxpayer, and I'm sure we want to negotiate down rates with them as opposed to encouraging current rates.
Well, you don't. But you
there's
don't have
another
to.
issue that came up that he wanted me to ask about, was the fact that a lot of this was encouraged in the stressed municipal enterprise zones, and he's saying that the state's having a hard time keeping up their end of the bargain in terms of paying for that portion of the obligation, that they're late on their payments as is. Would this only exacerbate that problem?
So let me answer the first question first, if that's all right. So again, if ESPN came to the town of Bristol and said, we want to, you know, right now they have the ability to negotiate a property tax deal if they wanted to. This is no different. The town can say, no, we're not going to negotiate. ESPN could say, well, we're going to think about another location. That's the competitive tension. Again, whether we like it or not, that's out there. This does not change that. This bill does not change that. Towns will have the same rights as they have. We can talk about the 20 or 30 year period. I heard Rep. Nuccio's comments before, but this shouldn't change the negotiating tension, in my opinion, between a company and a town that hosts them. In terms of I believe you were referencing the enterprise zone program, and that's a broader discussion perhaps for this committee and ultimately the budget. I am a believer and a proponent in the enterprise zone program where the state is contributing as well as the municipality is de facto contributing. So I think that there may be discussions that are needed in terms of making sure that's funded going forward, but the enterprise zone program is a property tax program that I think makes a lot of sense. But to be very precise, you know, in this instance, if it's in an enterprise zone, there still would need to be a host fee agreement that would be negotiated, and again, entirely up to the municipality representative. So there's not a repayment from the state, but the town of Bristol in this example would name the fee that they think is appropriate, whether that's a discount to taxes or full taxes.
Okay.
Representative Nuccio, followed by Senator Formica, followed by Representative Farrar.
Good morning, Commissioner. How are you?
I'm good. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you again. So one of my questions just happened to be, I wanted to understand fully what this law will have for impact on existing data centers, because besides Bristol, there are several other, I would assume, data centers in the state. So how would this impact them currently? Because the third piece of this being the town piece, you just talked a little bit about, and I want to get into that a little bit more, but the first couple of pieces here are definitely more state driven. So would this change the existing environment these data centers are working in currently, or any of their tax? Would it basically bring them in?
It does not touch existing data centers. The one area where it may touch them, Representative, though, is if an existing data center decided to do a $50 million, new data center or build, they would be eligible in an enterprise zone or opportunity zone, or 200 million outside of it. Then that would effectively be under the legislation. But for a data center that's currently operating and not planning an investment above the thresholds, they would continue to operate as they do.
All right, so if they do a new build, they could capitalize on this law, but if they were existing, they could not. So if they decided to close their current facility and then reopen in a different area, they could then be captured underneath this.
Yes, I think that example, though, is unlikely, given, again, the capital investments here are very significant. So I don't think those data centers would be financially incented to do that. But yes, they could do that in the extreme.
Okay. So that was one question. I think the real area that I struggle in, and I'm hoping maybe you can give us some clarity on. You had mentioned that several other states already have legislation like this. I too have been reached out to by a couple of people regarding the municipal side of this, and the feeling is generally overall hand tying of the town. And I know it's not like it's not mandatory, but having this town specific language in there does kind of put the onus on the town. So the fact that we talked about any investments or upgrades, the MOU has to be there for 30 years and all of that. And then when we started to talk about sewer fees and water fees and such, any abatement or exemption on those are directly impacting the residents, because if those fees go up throughout the years and this data center does not have to account for their portion of the water or the sewer, and et cetera, then the town's residents are going to have to be supplementing that. So I guess what I'm hoping you can kind of give us a little more understanding on is the states that currently have this legislation. Can you give us some information on what they have in there? And B, how wedded are we to having the municipal piece in there? Do you feel like that's a make or break? Because that's probably the hardest part for me in this bill.
So let me address the second part of your question first. So I make or break is a strong word. I do think it's really important in terms of how the state markets itself, that there is a 20 or 30 year agreement as it relates to sales and use tax, potentially the financial transactions tax, and the property tax or the host fee in lieu of the property tax. I do want to be very clear on this point, and Randy mentioned it. If a municipality doesn't want to host one of these data centers, they can simply say no. They can simply say no, and it's over at that point in time. If potentially, Representative Nikhil, if they only want to do a 10 or 15 year, fixed fee agreement, there's no reason why within the host fee, the locality couldn't say, it'll be $1 million a year, hypothetically, for the first 10 or 15 years, and then we're going to revert to property taxes at that point in time. So, sorry, I don't know if I'm getting a lot of feedback here.
Yeah, I am too. I hear that. It sounds like somebody's got something going.
Christina, can we please mute everybody?
So you just had a really good point there. I think maybe we could talk about a little bit as you continue on. But so you're basically saying that the 30 years is not the written in stone part for the municipalities.
Well, it's my point is it is written in stone, but I'm saying there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how the municipalities implement it. So if they want to do a fixed fee for a portion of that and then have an escalator or revert to property tax, that is up to the municipality, in my opinion. In addition to your point about sewer fees, the goal is, candidly, the goal is for data centers to be joining these towns and to be bearing a portion of the fixed costs to help the sewer fees for other residents, if this is done right, in my opinion. So I think we want to make sure that, and I talked to CCM. I will, if we do proceed here, I will work with CCM and the municipalities on the flexibility in these host fee agreements. But I want to make sure that, if municipalities want to say that the sewer fee, it can be variable, for example, again, maybe it'll be negotiated. I don't see any reason why that can't be the case. This is all going to come down to the investor is going to want as much certainty as possible, and the municipality is going to need to make sure they're taking care of their residents.
And then maybe the first part of my question regarding the other states and what they're.
Oh, yes, sorry.
No, that's okay. I'm here, I'm typing here, so I'm keeping track.
I don't want to overstay my welcome. It varies. In short, what's consistent throughout is a period, whether that's, it can be as low as 10 years. Indiana does it for up to 50 years for certain investments of sales and use tax abatement. There have been in some legislation, I believe property tax has been directly addressed in the state legislation. In some states, it hasn't been. In other states, there's nuances of how the sales and use exemption is implemented. But what's consistent in all of those states is some tenor of exemption on, in particular, data center equipment, given the servers and computers and racks are replaced every 3 or 4 years. And, 6% of that cost is very considerable.
Okay. I think that's all that I have right now. I reserve the right to come back if I have more.
Of course.
Thank you.
Senator Formica.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Commissioner.
Morning.
I have 3 particular questions. I noticed in the bill's language, there's $50,000 a data center provides to DECD for office support. imagine that's just admin support. You touched a little bit in your conversation about negotiations that the municipalities will have. In my experience, a lot of leaders of municipalities are not business people in this realm of dollars, $300, $400, $500, $600 million. And with this office that you're creating, and you mentioned continuing support to CCM and municipalities, but would your office be able to take advantage of your expertise in dealing with this dollar value to assist in negotiations for these municipalities? Because quite frankly, some people may be in over their head when it comes to that, and not be able to get the best deal, especially as you outlined some terms that Representative Nuccio talked about, and escalation clauses and increasing.
Yeah, so on the administrative point, Senator Formica, yes, the intent of the up to $50,000 fee is to make this self-funding, so there's no fiscal note on this bill. So if we have an industry where you have 2 or 3 of these being built every 2 years, you have a self-funding, headcount or 2 at DECD. So that was the intent of the admin cost. That's going to be borne by the developer. In terms of municipal support, I'm open-minded on that. We want to make sure that localities, CCM, that they feel that they have the expertise and the tools. Yeah, these are, again, $200, $300, $400 million investments, sometimes even more. So that is certainly advice, whether it's formally or informally, we can and will provide.
Good. That's what I had hoped that you would say. And then my other 2 questions are that this is a 30-year deal, basically, for financing and investment return, I'm sure, in a very large building. Are we concerned about outdated technology catching up to this within the 30-year period? And finally, what about the power that's needed to provide these data centers? The state is challenged with generation of new energy sources, and this would seem to put a significant strain on the amount of power that are required, especially if there are multiples of these centers throughout the state.
Yeah, so on the technology or obsolescence question, let me take that first. So there is always that risk, but what we've seen empirically, though, is you have a shell and a data center that typically is proximate to power, as well as has a very significant fiber connection. So there is a real benefit to the location in the shell. And then where you see the newer, more efficient technology is with the servers themselves and what's inside the data center, the guts, being replaced on a regular basis, as and when that technology gets faster and more efficient. Could that change? Absolutely. I don't believe that is the base case, obviously. I think you're going to have well-located shells with power and fiber connectivity. And then the goal is to, again, to keep updating what's inside to make sure that the center is cutting edge and efficient from a data center and co-location perspective. As it relates to power, these data centers, make no mistake, are big power users. And in my mind, that's a double-edged sword of sorts. The state is not known for its low-cost power. I do think there are ways where we can and will be competitive. Again, part of this is the legislation we're contemplating here. I think it's going to be up to whether it's the municipal utilities or Eversource and UI to make calculations in terms of, what is the cost of generation, think about their fixed cost, the overall infrastructure in grid in terms of the maintenance of that. And I do think that's going to be a negotiation that's similar to if a big manufacturer, another big user of power was coming online. I take it these are going to be even bigger, but that type of dialogue is going to need to happen in planning, candidly, to make sure that we have sufficient generation capacity if this industry does take off in Connecticut.
Very good. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time and answering my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Farrar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Commissioner, for being with us, even in this, as you said, cloud capacity. Thanks for your remarks kind of at the outset. I know for all of us in kind of hearing about this opportunity, so many of us are rightly interested in making sure that the jobs we're talking about truly are in-state jobs. So can you speak to how this bill and how we can make that happen, that when we're talking about developing data centers, those jobs are for in-state residents?
Yeah, and I'll take a swing, but I think you're going to have another some of the building trades, I think, will be testifying later, and they will be better suited to do it. So the bill currently doesn't mandate, the residence of the worker, whether it's a construction worker or not. And I'm not a proponent of further constraining or mandating that at this point for a couple of reasons. One, as I mentioned previously, the amount of workers here are significant. So we want to make sure that there is sufficient labor and capacity to get these data centers built. I think the trades, in terms of adapting if this industry does come here, making sure that you could have a rolling, again, 2 or 3 data centers being built every so years, but it is a significant need of labor, and it is specialized to a certain extent as well. So we're going to need to make sure that labor force is here and ready in Connecticut and adapting to the needs of the industry. But what we don't want to do, in my opinion, is mandate something that makes us not competitive or less competitive. Then the intent of the whole bill is for naught if we do that. So I'll let the trades answer a bit more, but my sense is with the demand and with the size of the jobs and the specialization, that we will be able to adapt, and the vast majority of these jobs, if not initially, over time, will be in-state residents that specialize in this.
Super. I'm glad to hear your optimism about that. I think where I'm a little concerned is it sounds like you're deferring this very much to the local level, and I'm curious, in the office you're talking about that's going to be set up, is there any type of capacity that's going to be provided to make sure that the municipalities really are considering these aspects when signing these host agreements? Because it's all about making sure that we're prioritizing as much in-state jobs as possible.
Yeah, again, ultimately, we're aligned on that point, Representative. My only caveat there is the market is going to, the bigger end here is embracing the industry, and the market's going to determine, the jobs and the special need for those jobs. Based on what I know right now, we can address that need, and if not, we will be able to address it very quickly. So again, the labor folks should address that a bit more, but I am optimistic there. On the town point, yes, I will work with CCM, and what I've discussed with CCM is potentially hosting a webinar if this bill, were to pass, with town managers or chief elected officials on how DECD can work with them, to Senator Formica's point too, and make sure that we are working hand in glove with localities, and that again, the state collectively, the state and the towns are getting a fair deal.
Great. And when you're kind of thinking about, again, your role and what this new office role might be, I know you also in DECD have the Office of Workforce Strategy, and there's been, certainly a plan put forward around the workforce strategy for the future. And I think there's certainly, as you said, opportunity here moving forward. So how do you see that starting right now? Like, let's say we pass, this bill and this is incentivizing data centers. How can we start now to make sure that we're training, especially underrepresented populations into these careers?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and again, this kind of this pivots again to the trades, and I want to be deferential to them in terms of some of their apprenticeship programs, and there are a lot of existing programs in the state to make sure that we are doing that training. But if again, I think I want to make sure that we're not getting the cart in front of the horse to a certain extent. I want to make sure that there are actionable projects, and we understand where there, if there are deficiencies where they may be, and then work with the Office of Workforce Strategy, with labor, and make sure that we're addressing those. So I think we're going to need a tangible project to do that. And there certainly may be some growing pains as we embark here, but I'm confident that we can address it with those folks at the table.
Okay. Yeah, again, I'm glad to hear that this is, part of kind of your perspective on it. But I think for all of us, as we're trying to kind of wrap our heads around what it looks like to support this, as much as we can have those in-state jobs and bringing women, people of color into these high-wage, high-growth jobs. I mean, it's good to hear we're on the same page, but I think putting those two opportunities together is key. Just one other quick question about the environmental side of this. I know you kind of spoke to how it's not, there's no specificity around that in the bill as it sits. Is there an expectation? Have you seen models in other states of how the expectations on the environmental impact fits into the local host agreements? I mainly ask because I know in I think in another state, they actually built into the state incentive that these facilities were carbon neutral or, had some energy efficiency with them. So, how do you think municipalities should proceed, particularly on the environmental side of this?
Again, this in my mind, so that obviously any of these builds will need to be subject to state and or federal guidelines as it relates to emissions, permitting, etc. I think there is one other state, and Tony Roberto, my colleague, is here. Maybe it's Illinois, that did try to introduce some aspect of carbon neutrality. I think what's challenging is we want to the entire initiative needs to work from a market perspective. And I think carbon neutrality, most of these sites, again, some of them do utilize renewables, but diesel backup is very common in this industry. I think that may change over time as we get more efficient energy and potentially batteries and battery storage. But right now we want to make sure that we are conforming to kind of what the industry market dynamics are. And I think if we said, you need to be 100% renewable, again, we wouldn't get the investment because it's just not commercially viable right now. I will say, though, many of the big users, to Representative Cheeseman's question to me initially, a lot of the tech companies and the financial companies, many of them share, like Governor Lamont's 2040 carbon neutral vision. I think what you'll see over time is you're going to have more efficient and more renewable data sources. But my hope is that you also have customers that are going to demand that the data center operator utilize those sources, even if it's more expensive to them. Again, you are relying on the market there. I take that point. We're not mandating it, but I do think that's what we should expect to see in this industry, not just in Connecticut, but across the country.
Super. Thank you for walking me through that. And again, I'm glad that we're talking about this today. I think that there's as you said, kind of a range of opportunities here, but I hope that, again, we kind of think about this in prioritizing our in-state workers and just so many folks as well that are unemployed right now and how we get them into these fields. So thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Representative.
Representative Chafee, followed by Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for speaking with us this morning. I have a question. How many data centers are currently operating in the state? Do you have any idea?
I believe, and again, Tony can correct me if I'm wrong, I believe it's around 10, but really the way you think about the market is in megawatts of power capacity, and I believe it's under 15. So there are data centers, but they're small data centers. So some of these new builds, I think, will be 20, 25, 30 megawatts and potentially upwards of 50 megawatts each. So you could see one or two very big hyperscale data centers, which, that might be one data center, but it could basically dwarf the existing capacity in the state.
Do you have any idea how much sales tax revenue is collected from the current data centers?
I don't have that off the top of my head. We can make estimations. Tony, do you have it? I see you shaking your head.
I don't have the exact number what's collected, but I think David is correct. These are usually smaller scale data center. I did go back and actually research some of the REITs, and in fact, they were writing down the assets because they don't function in Connecticut. They just can't get enough takers. So all of the equipment that goes into data centers in Connecticut is technically subject to sales tax. On a 32 megawatt data center, for example, you're probably investing another $100 million every 3 to 4 years. In just equipment alone. Most of the ones we have are in Norwalk and Stamford, and they're generally small scale. And the companies that own them were actually writing down the assets for those reasons. They just couldn't get tenants.
Yeah, we're not, so Representative, so just for the record, that was Tony Roberto, my colleague.
Oh, I'm sorry.
DECD. No, I just wanted to just make it clear because we're on Zoom. So, but yeah, we're not able to get accurate data on that. I think the main takeaway is it is a very small industry to date in Connecticut, and to Tony's point, not one that has been growing or flourishing.
How big do you anticipate the industry will be, or how many data centers would you anticipate if this bill passes?
Yeah, it's very tough to handicap. I mean, I think in a, you could see 3 to 5 actionable deals over the next 2 to 4 years. And then these, again, the size of the deals is what matters. So they could be larger deals. And then I think if you have an industry that takes up, there's no reason that you couldn't see, again, this is dependent on power generation capacity, land, access to fiber, and all of this working for the towns as well. You could see 10 to 20 of these centers built over the next decade.
What are some of the long-term economic benefits of having the data centers? I know obviously the construction jobs are vital, and there are some permanent jobs kind of limited in working to, maintain or upkeep the data center. Are there any other benefits to hosting these in terms of like spin-off industry or attracting other tech companies? Like,
Yes.
what is the long-term benefit of this?
Yeah, I mean, listen, I would say the industry itself, though, the way I think about it, there is a benefit, whether it's just servicing them afterwards. There's very few industries that are growing and have grown as fast as data centers. So, if you were to tell me, or I were to tell the committee that, there's an opportunity to make an investment or have a policy that encourages an industry that's going to grow at a 6% compound annual growth clip, that's very hard to come by. So I think the industry in and of itself and the employees and the servicing of the center, as Tony mentioned, you could have $100 million spent every 3 to 4 years. That is real people that are coming in and out that are replacing those computers and servers. So that's the direct jobs. On the indirect jobs, and there have been some studies on this, and I do haircut it a little bit myself, but when you have state-of-the-art data centers, you generally are going to have financial and technology jobs that want to be proximate to those data centers because of reduced latency and the time, whether it's a financial transaction or just the overall speed of the internet and where the company's internet is working and how it's working. There is a benefit for service jobs to be proximate to these data centers. Again, some areas have done it well. Again, Northern Virginia is an area that has done it well, and some areas maybe haven't seen as much success. So it's to be determined, but I think there is upside there where you have ancillary businesses that do want to be proximate as it relates to their industry.
David, this is Tony again. The other component of it is that the fiber optic and infrastructure that's required to support these data center continues to get built out in the States, and it allows other companies to tap into that robust infrastructure that we are going to need. And in particular, as we start to think about self-driving cars, all of this is all going to be reliant on a data centers being able to communicate with all of those vehicles, as well as all the other technology that's currently in the process of being deployed.
Good, excellent point, Tony. Yeah, just the fiber infrastructure, there will be some benefits. Again, I don't want to oversell and saying that it's going to be a direct benefit to every resident in Connecticut, but there is a lot of upside, I think, in our view, if this industry grows in the state, from an infrastructure and ancillary jobs perspective.
Can you explain the concept of financial transaction tax?
Sure, and I think the language in the bill does it very well, but it is a tax on a transaction of whether it's a stock, a bond, an option, or other financial derivative, taxing that transaction where that financial instrument is going from one party to another, and you're taxing it where that transaction occurs.
So it's basically like a sales tax on stocks and bonds almost.
Yeah, but it's on, exactly, yes. It's on the transaction, but effectively at the point of sale, correct.
Have any states implemented this that you know of?
So New York and New Jersey may still implement it. That's what started the conversation with the exchanges. In terms of states that have actually implemented it within the US, I'm not aware of states that have at this point. I could be wrong, but just the threat of that, I think it was not, you saw the exchanges ultimately decide to have conversations elsewhere as opposed to be subject to that potential tax.
I know you mentioned you thought it was a bad idea, financial transaction tax. Could you explain your reasoning behind that a little bit?
Yeah, just what I mentioned. You're going to see, right? My personal view, again, not to get off topic, but if you're taxing a captive that has the potential ability to leave, and this is what may happen in New Jersey, unfortunately, they're not going to get the benefit of the financial transactions tax, and they're going to lose the business. So when you have a transferable, movable business, I don't think it's a good idea to tax them. And I think that's what you're seeing with financial transactions tax. There's other things as it relates to liquidity and how the market dynamic works, but we don't need to go into that. I think in lay terms, if you tax someone that can leave, they may leave. And that's what's happening here, especially this industry, given how significant they were.
Will this bill in any way exempt data centers or their owners from capital gains taxes or any other current taxes that we charge?
No, it will not. No, it's just focused on the sales and use tax and an exemption from any future financial transactions tax. Income taxes not exempt, capital gains taxes not exempt. All of that is still subject to state statute.
Do you know, will the host municipalities receive any pilot funds for the property tax exemption portion of that, or it's all up to the host agreement?
It's up to them to negotiate a fee that they see fit. So there's no pilot, but if they view the right fee to be $1 million or $2 million, then that's the fee they should negotiate.
Okay, I know you touched on it before, the co-location tenant. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that? What exactly qualifies someone as a co-location tenant?
So the way the bill defines it is a minimum 2-year period in terms of lease term. But more broadly, what's important for a co-location tenant and why it's important is in the current internet, and this is for financial firms as well as beyond, being proximate to your customers or your clients, and certainly if you're an exchange to the exchange is really important because that reduces the time. So the speed when we're on the internet, you want that to be as small as possible. So what you're seeing is that the trend in the industry is data centers that have many tenants that are all operating under one roof, where their servers are literally right next to each other. So that is what it's effectively a tenant in a data center, but this push to be proximate and under the same roof of your clients or the exchange is very real, and I think will continue because it reduces the latency or the lag speed.
Will the co-located tenants also be exempted from the property tax and the sales tax?
They will. Yes is the answer because they're a tenant of that landlord. The landlord is going to be paying the property tax on behalf of their tenants, not dissimilar from a manufacturer or a shopping mall today.
Okay, I'm just curious. I mean, if someone rents a room in this building, are they going to be exempted from? I know the gentleman from CCM brought up the point of property tax on vehicles or equipment. Can someone rent a room in one of these and be exempted from paying tax?
Again, the way it's going to work is if there's the only time the exemption comes into place is if there's a 200 million or 400 million investment, again, out of the easy and opportunity zone. And then the qualified tenants will be exempted from the sales and use tax and above 400 million, the financial transactions tax, but they're only exempted because of the investment that was made, the $400 million investment that was made in the center. And again, they can't just rent a room, they're signing a 2-year lease, and the cost of that benefit, if you will, is going to be in their lease. So it's going to be passed through to the tenants from the landlord.
Okay, one final question. Say the bill passes and a data center is qualified, and 5-10 years down the road, they make another investment of either 200 or 400 million, depending where they're located. Is that going to reset the clock on this? Will they have another 30 years of tax exemption, or is it 30 years from the original date?
Yeah, it's a great question. So if it's just incremental improvements on the existing parcel or property, then the 20 or 30-year exemption just continues. There's no reset of the clock. If the town if the developer purchases adjacent land, for example, or a new parcel to build a new property, then there is a new threshold set, 200 or 400 million, and a new host agreement that is to be negotiated. Okay. So that would reset the clock if they get to those new minimums with a new investment.
All right. Well, thank you for the information. I do think that our state has kind of underinvested in infrastructure, especially in the tech industry. So I do see the value in this. Obviously, I had quite a few questions, so I am a little bit hesitant on this, but I do see the value in attracting new industries to the state and especially creating jobs for the construction industry right now. So I appreciate the information, and thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Wong.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Commissioner Lehman. Thank you for joining us this morning, and I really wanted to extend my appreciation to you and your entire DECD team for your tireless effort in helping our state businesses during these difficult COVID times. So I'm very grateful to you, and I know many of our Chamber of Commerce and small business owners and are really appreciative. So thank you very much.
Sorry, thank you for saying that. I appreciate it, but
you don't get enough credit, and I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I'm extremely intrigued and encouraged by this proposal for our state to kind of participate in a critical economic multiplier business. And I think the key statement you mentioned in your testimony is to provide long-lasting benefit to our state in high-paying jobs and ancillary businesses. So I do have a few questions toward addressing the four regulatory and structural elements you mentioned. You already addressed the concerns on low cost energy, and I think that is a continual work in progress in our state. But you talked about the robust fiber optic infrastructure. Now in Connecticut, we have selective areas that have robust systems, but in some urban and rural settings, we're lacking. Is the administration looking to address a statewide improvement to digital infrastructure?
So that not part of this bill, Senator. There are other bills. There's a broadband bill that is out there currently, but no, this bill does not have a statewide. There's no statewide mandate from the administration as it relates to infrastructure. As Tony Roberto mentioned, that we think there will be some benefits, and these data centers do rely on connectivity to fiber, and we think that towns and others will benefit from it. But we're not mandating anything in this bill from a regulatory perspective. It's not the bill's role.
I understand that, but obviously, as you know, in business and anything that we do in this state, there is a interconnected ecosystem. So I'm encouraged that the governor has proposed alternative plans to look at increasing our infrastructure improvement, because those are critical parts that we need to attract businesses, not only data centers, but for many other businesses in a competitive marketplace. So, I hope that we will continue to do that. The other component you talked about is property taxes and capital development and equipment taxes. The states that you mentioned in your testimony have been innovative and bold in some of their tax credits and initiatives. And I think in your bill, you cited some of them. But to you as a business person, the sense of stability, structure, and predictability is essential. And what do you say to that from what we do to other businesses that may be looking to relocate or make that significant investment? What do we need to do as a state and a legislative body to create that environment where we don't go on a roller coaster and propose bills that impose statewide property tax increases, or to implement taxing that may come out of the blue and captive businesses? What do you say to that for us to try to create the four essential environment to attract businesses and data centers in this case?
Yeah, no, it's a good question in my view, and I want to keep this concise, not to get too off topic. But successful economies, they really rely on four things. You mentioned two of them. One of which is infrastructure needs to be best in class, and whether that means road or now internet, more and more. Secondly is tax certainty. Whether you're a family or a business, you need to be able to plan, and tax certainty does matter. Stability does matter, and I think that can be underappreciated at times. So those two are really important, and I would encourage this group and beyond. The governor's trying to be very vocal on this point in terms of tax certainty, because we do think that's critical to growth in the state. The other two things beyond that are, one, workforce and education is really critical, and Connecticut's long competed well on that, but I think we need to step that up with our Office of Workforce Competitiveness and maintain that advantage. And then lastly, our cities. Even in a post-COVID world, I think our cities are going to be crucial to growth. So making sure that there is investment there in terms of jobs and infrastructure, and some of these job creators, I think is key. So, sorry for the long answer, but I think both infrastructure and tax certainty are really critical to sustained growth in Connecticut.
No, I really appreciate that. And I do agree, as I cited, that this is one of the many opportunities we have to kind of create opportunities for not just our state, but to help our cities and to help our rural settings. And one of the things I sense is the fact that, with the likes of this type of technology, it's kind of hard to understand for a lot of people. It is an incredibly dynamically growing business, and you cite Microsoft as one of the entities, but for the regular people that are out there and not as engaged in this technology world, Amazon is actually a big player, and so is Google. From a standpoint, we always know Amazon has kind of the prime and direct to online sales, but the Amazon Web Services, AWS, that people see so much of, is a major third component of Amazon's business. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how powerful and how robust of an economic engine that is as an industry?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Yeah, the big tenants, some of the big 5 tech companies, including Amazon, Google, Apple, Facebook, Microsoft, you mentioned, the growth in the cloud and the growth for just the internet more broadly continues to really increase, again, especially in COVID. And those are, whether they own the center or more likely are tenants in some of these centers, you're going to see that as more and more of the world happens online, and there's more need for ability to store data and for the internet to occur at these actual facilities. So AWS has been a huge growth engine for Amazon Center, as you mentioned, and I don't think that growth is going to stop. I mean, the compound growth rates of a business like AWS are even well in excess of the 6 to 7%, I believe, that I referenced before for the data center industry.
Yeah, and I think that's important to kind of translate for people on Main Street to understand that they understand Google, they understand Amazon, but they need to also understand the business model that is all about data, all about being able to capture that. And I know Professor Cartensen has really advocated data center as a huge business model for us to grow. One of the things that was mentioned earlier is the fact that this is a economic sector or a business sector that is low impact. What I mean by that is that there's not a lot of footprint from a standpoint of potential pollution other than heat runoff, and it could virtually go anywhere in our state. Can you cite a little bit some of the advantages of that technology and this business model that it could literally go into our countryside, it can go into our cities, it can go into suburbs, but it has very small environmental damaging impact?
Well, I want to make sure I'm answering your question. So there is, I think the environmental impact, well, let me step back. These facilities, they're in my opinion, they're going to locate, and some of it may be in our cities and reuse kind of manufacturing or old buildings like what you're seeing in New Britain right now. Some of this, though, could be greenfield projects, proximate, important to power generation, and then also to fiber connectivity. That's going to be important. Where the environmental impact, though, does come into play, and this is what I would argue will be changing over time, not just here, but in the country, is a lot of the backup generation that is still done with diesel generators. They are higher efficiency generators than 2 years ago or 10 years ago, but these centers need to be able to run even when there's a power outage and when the grid's down for sustained periods of time. So diesel backup is important, and that's where there is some emissions, and I think there are environmental concerns that we need to be very mindful of, certainly. But my hope and belief is that as technology gets better and as backup and redundancy sources get better, you're going to see less of those emissions and less reliance on diesel. I'm not an expert here. I can't tell you if that's in 5 years or 20 years, but I think the big thing that these centers have going in terms of further mitigating that risk is their tenants, a lot of the big companies you mentioned, are committed to a zero carbon or carbon neutral footprint. And I think they're going to be pushing on the data center owners to have cleaner power and cleaner backup power.
Thank you. And my final question is, there's been some concerns raised by colleagues, rightfully so, in regards to existing data centers being potentially impacted by this incentive program. And number two, in regards to sometimes the presumed corporate culture of some of these entities you're talking about. I wanted to give you a chance to kind of articulate that, in my belief as well, that there is more than enough business to go around in the need here, and ultimately, number two, that these are entities that are looking to come in that create very high paying jobs and contribute greatly to the community. These are the businesses that we want to have in the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, I think on the point, and I'm sensitive to this, but I don't. If you have a town, if you're in a town that has a data center, it's not different than if you have a town that has a manufacturer and a new manufacturer is coming in. The new manufacturer is going to be asking for a property tax abatement. The town CEO is going to need to decide how, and policy-wise, how they're going to treat the incremental revenue and incremental jobs versus what's been there, and make sure that there is a fairness there. The town CEO has the same right to do that, and if they want to offer no abatement to the new building, or they want to treat both equally, upon the new build coming in, that's entirely up to the town. But to your point, Senator, I think what you're alluding to is, there should be a net incremental revenue and net incremental jobs here done at the local level if done right. And I think everyone wins if that is the case.
And I'll close by asking for your thoughts on this and recognizing the competitive marketplace to attract these businesses. It's not just the New England region. It's not just the United States. This is a international competitive marketplace. I know Connecticut has many advantages that we're able to articulate, and with the initiatives underway to potentially improve on the ones that we are not strong in. But it is important to note that we have to put the best foot forward, because this is a competition that is fierce. It is at the highest level, and it has long-lasting economic impact for states and regions and countries to be able to build a competitive advantage in that and being the best in that sector. What do you say to that, to reinforce the fact that as we explore this, that we have to feel as though we're scrapping and working hard and fighting to get to this?
No, that's exactly right. It's a competitive market, certainly domestically, and that's just not going to change whether we pass this legislation or we don't. That competition is there, and I think we as a state need to put our best foot forward. In my opinion, we owe it to our residents to do so, to try to encourage these type of growth industries where there are good paying jobs, and that's what I think this bill does.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. And again, I want to end by thanking you and all your team members for helping our businesses go through these difficult post-COVID pandemic economic challenges. So thank you very, very much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Nucio for the second time.
Thank you for indulging me, Chairman Scanlon. I appreciate it. I did have one other question that slipped my mind. So you brought up a very good point, Commissioner Lehman, that I think we would just like to, I think it's worthy of giving a moment to pause and think about. You mentioned these large buildings being adds to a town's net grand list. So we've already talked about the whole tax abatement part of that, but a key point here is that a town's net grand list is used for multiple calculations throughout the state, one of which that I'm very, very extremely sensitive to in my towns, which is the ECS credit. And the net grand list is the second part of the formula that really dings and hurts a lot of the rural towns. All three of my towns get slammed for that one. So one of my concerns on here, again, getting back to the municipal part of this, is if we're adding to the net grand list at such a high rate, not coming up with an MOU and possibly trying to find a way around that is one thing, but how do we mitigate the unintended consequence of these adding to grand lists and not coming back to bite us when it comes to ECS funding or other grant opportunities that are all linked to our net grand list growth?
So, Representative, that's a great question. That policy discussion and determination would need to be made by the legislature and the executive branch, but that's not going to be contemplated as part of this bill. Certainly, if there's a desire for the net grand list to carve out, for example, these projects, again, I'm not sure what the argument would be as it relates to ECS sharing. That would need to be addressed. But again, I don't think that's the appropriate place of this bill. We're just trying to grow the grand list here, ideally.
Okay, so then I would encourage my my fellow representatives here to consider that and how we would mitigate that, because the law of unintended consequences here, adding a $400 million piece of property to a net grand list that would then be used to calculate ECS and other grants would be something I would think would be substantial. Even a $50 million one would be substantial. So I'm not quite sure where we would go with that next, Commissioner. And like you said, that's probably not your wheelhouse, but any guidance that I can get from anybody to make sure that we're mitigating that would be appreciated. And Chairman, thank you again for indulging me.
Thank you, Representative. Representative Meskers.
Thank you, Chairman Scanlon. Commissioner Lehman. So when we're looking at this project, we're looking, or this legislation to encourage the industry, you made reference to Virginia, right? And you made reference to other states that are running who are running competitive games to locate this industry. can you talk about where they are now, more or less, in terms of the amount of that industry located there, the associated jobs, and what kind of co-location you're seeing? Because, you know, what we're asking for, or what you're asking for here, is a vision from us to support an industry that you ultimately think has a, I know you can't promise this, but you're looking to create a footprint for an opportunity space to grow, to add jobs to the state. So, you know, you're talking about 40, 50 jobs. I think we spoke about it yesterday in a committee meeting or in a hearing, and you talked about $100,000 per job on average post development. You talked about 1,000 to 2,000 construction jobs for 18 months. So we get in a rolling cycle. How many people ideally, you know, when does the market get to a point where, or when we get a reasonable market share, given where we are in the tri-state? What's your hope in terms of number of data centers?
Yep.
What else comes? I mean, I know part of that is a promise I wouldn't hold you to, but I'd like to hear that vision.
No, and I don't want to speculate, you know, without, you know, I'll share my opinion, I guess. And Fred Karstensen has done some work on this, and you can ask him. I believe he's testifying later. But in a scenario where you have, again, 1 to 3 of these built every 2 years, you know, we shouldn't think about it as 1,000 construction jobs, then it drops off. You're going to have, you know, 2,000 or more construction jobs in that steady state environment of being built. Now, again, it's tough to promise that. I don't know if it's going to take hold given our energy costs and the land that's available, but I think that is possible. And then in the direct jobs of 50 plus or minus per each of these centers, all that's the direct benefit, but it could be in the thousands of jobs, Representative Meskers. I think the indirect jobs in Loudoun County, Virginia, Ashburn area is probably the best analog of the biggest market in the US, I believe. Other big markets, you know, Denver, Colorado has one, Dallas, Texas, broadly in Texas, Chicago is one as well. We can try to get some more data in terms of, you know, if there is good data out there on direct headcount and then adjacent headcount. I think what's tough though is, you know, determining causality, Steve, candidly, you know, is, you know, Northern Virginia, is that a booming tech and defense market because of the data centers or because of other policy decisions or other things as it relates to their geography? So that's where there's a little bit more of a leap of faith, which is why I focus more on, you know, if we do this right and we have an industry, what direct construction and non-construction jobs do we have? And then I think everything else is pure upside of industries that want to locate here because of our cutting edge technology and access to these data centers.
Okay, that's fair enough. So,
as Fred, it's a big number. He's done more modeling than I have on this, I believe.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Seeing no further questions, Commissioner, thank you for being with us today and for your time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. Talk soon.
Next up, Senator Summers.
Yes, good morning. Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, Senator Martin, and Representative Cheeseman, and the distinguished members of the Finance Committee. I am here in full support of Bill 6468 on the data centers. I feel that it is a great opportunity for the state of Connecticut to create the landscape in which we can attract a new industry here in the state. We are located between Boston and New York, which makes us a
Senator, you're freezing up a little bit. Senator, I'm not sure if you can hear us, but your internet is frozen. All right. Senator Summers is perpetually frozen. Is Mr. Toner here? Tom, can we go to him and then go back to Senator?
Yes, he is here. Yep.
Okay. Mr. Toner, why don't you go ahead and we'll come back to Senator Summers if she gets her internet connection back.
Yeah, I can reach out to Senator Summers. It's Tom.
Thanks, Tom.
I texted her, Tom, and let her know.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Joe Toner. Tom, Christina,
Yeah,
is Joe?
he is in the room. I just don't know. Maybe he wasn't expecting to go so soon. You do have some other people in here if you want to.
How about Fred Carstensen?
Let me see if he's in here. Let me see if he's in the. Not sure if he is here, but we definitely have Anders Frazone if he's ready. Franzone.
Okay. Mr. Franzone.
I'm
welcome
sorry.
you. Oh, Joe, hey, how you doing?
I apologize.
Nope, go ahead. You're up.
Thank you. Excuse me. So, Committee of Finance, Revenue and Bonding, I'd like to speak on House Bill 6468, Senator Fonfara, Representative Scanlon, Senator Martin, Representative Cheeseman, and members of the committee. I rise in support of HB 6468 on behalf of the 30,000 hardworking men and women of the Connecticut State Building Trades Council. It's a pleasure to see that the state of Connecticut is offering incentives that will bring much needed construction jobs to our members. Got Space Data LLC has agreed to use a project labor agreement on all of their data centers in Connecticut. By using a project labor agreement, it guarantees that Connecticut residents will be working on these projects, earning area standard wages and benefit packages. It also ensures that people of color, women, and returning veterans will be included on these projects. It will also create opportunities for apprentices entering the trades. The Connecticut State Building Trades Council urges the committee to support HB 6468 to help our members get back to work. We currently have over 30% unemployment in the trades, and we have never really truly recovered from the recession of 2007. So that's just kind of the written statements I have. And as I alluded, we've been struggling in the trades to put people to work. And this would be a great opportunity to make sure our members get back to work. Currently, our members are traveling out of state to make a living. And what we're nervous about is they're going to New York, they're going to Massachusetts and Rhode Island and surrounding states in New England. And we're nervous that they're not going to come back. These are highly trained people, middle-class jobs. They're your soccer coaches, your little league coaches, folks that run the Boy Scouts and the Girl Scouts. And there's no opportunity here in Connecticut. So we're hoping that, this goes through so we can bring some of our members back and get them back working. Also, just so everyone knows, in the unionized construction industry, if you're not working, benefits aren't being paid on behalf of yourself for your health and your retirement plans. So on top of not working, a lot of our members are exhausting their benefits and they don't have any health benefits currently. To make it even worse, and I'll stop after I say this, it takes almost 4 weeks to get an unemployment check once you're laid off in the construction industries. And that's a huge strain also on the families of the building trade. So I hope you keep all these factors in mind when you're making your decisions, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for being here this morning. Just two questions for you. I hope you can elaborate a little bit. You talked about the PLA, and I think we've been getting a lot of questions in the committee today, and I've been getting a lot of questions as the chairman about wanting to ensure that if and when these local projects happen, that number one, Connecticut workers will be prioritized to work on those job sites, and number two, that those job forces, whether they be 1,000 to 1,500 workers, as the commissioner testified, would have a representative number of minority contractors working on those job sites. And I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how PLAs get structured and what that process looks like so that local individual leaders, whether they be state reps, mayors, first selectmen, town councilmen, could help influence the character of that workforce.
Yeah, thank you, Representative Scanlon. So typically what we do on a project labor agreement, the building trades, is we'll go into a community and we find out what the needs of the community are. So for instance, when we go into a community, depending on, we'll meet with the representatives, we'll meet with the community groups, the elected officials, and what happens is we ended up figuring out what we can do to enhance their community. So for instance, if typically we'll take folks in from the towns and we'll roll them into the apprenticeship programs. And this provides a great opportunity to these folks to have a career, and also helps some of the folks that are less fortunate to be able to get back and forth to the job site, right? So typically in the construction industry, you're driving all over the place, on a daily basis, chasing the work all over the state of Connecticut. In this case, what we'll have is we'll make sure that the folks are working locally where they get back and forth to work, get some money for a car, get the car insurance and all the stuff that they need to make sure that they could succeed in the construction industry. As far as contractually on the contractual side, we're willing to work with any developer, any owner to make sure whatever needs they need, the community needs and ourselves, and we'll incorporate those needs into the project labor agreement. So whatever, if we go to a community and we typically always have minority contractor language in our project labor agreements. We have minority hiring goals or people of color, women hiring goals in the project labor agreements. And as I stated, we do a lot with the veterans. So as far as the PLAs go, the PLAs are definitely going to ensure that local Connecticut people are going to be working on the project, more specifically from the community. And the beauty of it is everyone's going to be making a livable wage. We have a huge problem at Amazon right now in Windsor. We have over 300 construction workers working for substandard wages up in Windsor, and in some cases 4 or 5 wide in a hotel, sharing a hotel room. And that doesn't complete the economic circle here in the state of Connecticut. We have to make sure we can ensure that these projects, include folks from the state of Connecticut with livable wages.
Thanks, Joe. Representative Farrar.
Thanks, Chairman. Joe, thanks for being here, even in this Zoom environment. And thank you for walking through, again, your role in the project labor agreements. I think I just had a quick question because I know earlier when the commissioner was here, he gave us such a thorough picture of what this would look like and kind of kept mentioning that it'll be on the municipalities to develop these PLAs. But obviously the way the bill is structured as a state, we're giving significant state tax incentives. So I wanted to hear kind of from your perspective, yes, the municipalities can set up these PLAs and it's good to hear that there is one MOU out there. But how do you see the opportunity of what the state could do to really encourage and incentivize PLAs?
Well, thank you, Representative Farrar. I think right out of the chute, as you mentioned, we're in good shape with the developer on the first few data centers, but I think it's incumbent on the state of Connecticut to ensure that local people are working on these projects and it comes out of this bill. Typically, unless it's enforced through the language here in this bill, I hate to say this, but I don't see it really creating the opportunity for construction workers in the state of Connecticut. I have to disagree. I think Commissioner Lehman does do a great job here for the state of Connecticut, but I've heard it numerous times that he always, any type of development plan, if you include a livable wage or if you include area standards or local folks, he seems to call it restrictive. And I don't agree with it. I think it's another word that begins with R and it's called responsibility. It's a responsibility to make sure that we have people working on these projects, making a livable wage that live in the state of Connecticut if these developers are getting incentives, right? If they're getting on the development side, they're doing well, right? They're doing good. But we should also make sure as a state of Connecticut that folks that are marginalized, folks from disadvantaged backgrounds are having an opportunity to work on these projects. And that's what we do. We ensure through the project labor agreements that we're going to bring these folks in, we're going to train them, and they're going to make a livable wage here in the state of Connecticut, which completes the economic circle. So I would hope, if the bill is not completely drafted, that we do make sure that project labor agreements are put into the bill to make sure that local folks from the state of Connecticut are ensured livable wages on these projects.
Thanks, Joe, for giving your perspective on what our role can be at the state level and appreciate it. Thanks again.
Thank you, Representative.
Senator Moore.
Thank you. Good morning, Tony. How are you?
Good morning.
I have a question because I heard you say earlier that the municipalities set up the PLAs. And now I think I hear you saying that it should be written into the legislation that the people should be held local. I heard you also say that a lot of the workers, trades are traveling out of state because that's where the work is. What stops that from being the reverse, that people are traveling from outside of to have jobs? And then within your PLAs to enforce a standard of using local, where is it in there that also says that percentage of those workers should be minority?
Hi, Senator Moore.
Hi.
I'll try to clarify. So typically what we do is, I think the point with, unless the language, if it's incumbent on the municipality to do a project labor agreement, that's a problem with us. Earlier, what I said to Representative Scanlon, I'll try to clarify it is, once the PLA, say a PLA is adopted on a broader stance through the state of Connecticut, then we meet with the municipality to see what their needs are to include folks from that municipality or from that area. So so we meet with the folks from the community to find out what we could put in the project labor agreement to assure that their residents are working and that we're completing, giving everyone a chance to go to work in that community. So does that clarify that portion of it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And then secondly, you broke up a little bit with about moving out of state. Can you repeat that, please?
Well, I said you mentioned that a lot of the trades are leaving Connecticut right now because the work's not here. They're going out of state for jobs, working out of state. What prohibits that from happening reverse, that people from out of state won't be coming into Connecticut for these jobs?
Oh, thank you. So on a project labor agreement, we make the project labor agreement is inclusive. It will include Connecticut residents. So we could put in the project labor agreement to make sure, especially on like a recovery bill like this, to make sure that we're creating jobs. We could put the project labor agreement in. We could put the language in the project labor agreement to ensure that Connecticut residents are on the project.
And so the other part of that is, what is to ensure that there's a certain amount of minorities hired? So when you come into a town like Bridgeport, where there's not a lot of people involved in the trades here, and I heard you talk about apprenticeship programs, what in the labor agreement would ensure that people of color are included in that project?
All right, so typically what we'll do in the community, and I've been the building trades in Hartford, the president of building trades in Hartford for years, and I'll just kind of give you a rundown of what we do up here, and it will be duplicated on every community. What we like to do is we like to come in and identify 12 to 15 folks from the community, with help from the community. Like up in Wyndham, we're doing it right now with the NAACP. We have a project labor agreement at Wyndham High School. So we have a relationship with Leah Rawls up at Wyndham and the community up there. The different community groups are going to put forth, folks that are interested in the building trades. And we're going to have a pre-apprenticeship program for 2 weeks, a 40-hour certification class that's going to be held at the Laborers Academy, where we're going to take these folks, we're going to give them the basic construction knowledge, the basic construction skills. We're going to complete the class with them. They'll get the OSHA 10, they'll get other necessary certificates to get on the site. And then what we're going to do at Wyndham High School is we're going to put these folks we're going to write their positions in the project labor agreement to assure that they're going to be on the job from start to finish. So we could duplicate that process everywhere we go. We're in the midst of doing it in Manchester. We have a PLA presentation in Manchester. We have one in Torrington. Up in Killingly, with the Killingly Powerhouse, we have language in there that's going to include the technical school up there to make sure we have residents working up there. So we'll go back to, we have no issue including everybody, and we'll continue to include everybody. And that kind of goes back to the community. When we go to these communities, we want to make sure that the community is represented on these projects, not just for a job, but for a career. So when that job is complete, the member of Bridgeport is going to go from Bridgeport to Hartford to New Britain, right? That's what we do in the building trades, and that's what we'll offer to any community that we're going to work in on the data centers.
So, thank you. So the apprenticeship program that could come out of this would help anyone who's not planning to go to perhaps college or higher education to go right into apprenticeship program that could lead them into a permanent job. Is that correct?
Yes. I'm sorry, I skipped that point. So we have the pre-apprenticeship program, and then once they complete the pre-apprenticeship program, they get slotted into a building trades apprenticeship program. So they'll be slotted into a state registered certified apprenticeship training program. And from that point, they'll be a member of that affiliated local union, until they retire. And then we train them there within our own, within the trades. They have their own training, and then they'll be trained within their own trade, more specifically.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Cabrera.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Toner. Thank you for being with us today. I was wondering, I started my career in the trades for 10 years and worked with project labor agreements quite a bit. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit with the committee some of the things that can go wrong on a project when there is not a project labor agreement in place. I know you probably have seen some of the things I saw in my career, some of the games and the contractors playing subcontractors. I was wondering if you could just maybe touch a little bit upon that, or why it's so critical to have a project labor agreement.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I think what the first point I'd make is, without a project labor agreement, the workers aren't protected. A, for the safety on the construction project, and B, the wages and the benefits. On any project, any construction project, the total cost of a project on the labor side is 20 to 25%. So there's a myth that surrounds any type of project labor agreement when everyone wants to kind of say, well, it's more expensive. It's not more expensive. If you think about on a $100 million project, only 20 to 25 million of that is in wages, right? So if you're getting a livable wage, that's a small part of the overall cost of a project, right? So it ensures that people are going to get paid right. There's safety on the job. And quite frankly, in the state of Connecticut, and I'll go back to the disaster up in Windsor at Amazon. Amazon has a lot of state contractors up there. And I can guarantee you that they're not paying into the Department of Revenue Service, right? We had a contractor thrown off at an Amazon job that didn't have workers' comp. They got cited for not having workers' compensation 3 separate times in the state of Connecticut within a 3-year period. So what happens is, unfortunately, the folks that are working for these contractors, if they get hurt, they're driving them in the back of a pickup truck to the emergency room, and we're paying for it, right? It's just, there's no skin in the game for unscrupulous contractors. And a project labor agreement assures that the contractors that are working on these projects are going to adhere to all the safety conditions set forth in the collective bargain agreements. And also they're going to make sure the wages and benefits are paid properly. And then thirdly, I would just say is the quality of the work that you have is second to none in the unionized construction industry. Everything is done on time, within budget, under a project labor agreement. For the last 21 years that I've been here as representing the iron workers, all our project labor agreements have gone well. And in addition to it, we spoke to Senator Moore. The folks that work on these project labor agreements that we do take in and become part of our membership, they're members for life, and they continue to work in the industry with a livable wage and a retirement and health benefits. So that's the importance of the project labor agreement, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Toner. Yeah, I hope as we consider this proposal that we have more ongoing conversations. I am somewhat concerned with some of the tax breaks inherited in the bill, and I think it would be bad if we have people who get these jobs be people who don't live in our state. I'd like to make sure we put something in a project labor agreement can help do that. Make sure that these jobs actually go to Connecticut residents so that they can capture some of that tax revenue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator. Representative Chafee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Joe, for speaking with us today. I just want to agree with you that if we're going to incentivize this industry, I think these jobs should be given to Connecticut residents. And I was just curious, in your experience, has incentive like this ever gone through and included a PLA or a requirement that the work be done by in-state workers?
Yes, they have been. And quite frankly, it's the responsible thing to do. We're using tax dollars to incentivize businesses to come to the state of Connecticut. We should ensure that Connecticut residents are working on these projects under livable working making a livable wage. So they have been done before, and we're looking forward to do more of them in the future.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Chafee.
Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. Thank you for coming here today. Joe, I have a couple of questions for you, and they relate to the use of the PLAs. So basically 86% of the construction industry in Connecticut is non-union labor. Are you saying every one of those construction firms has substandard wages, substandard conditions, that is not delivering good value for money?
No, but the 86% is misleading. In the major construction industry, like the data centers that we're working on, Representative Cheeseman, I think, if somebody's building a house or putting an addition onto a house, that's inclusive in your numbers. And I'm not saying that there are good non-union contractors out there that pay livable wages, but by most part, I would have to say there's no guarantee that livable wages and proper benefits are paid without a project labor agreement.
So, I mean, certainly when it comes to public projects, I know anything over $1 million dictates a PLA. But again, getting back to your point, looking at the major construction companies in my part of the state, are you saying that the only guarantee we have that these are going to be good jobs and it is by using a PLA? Because it seems to me it's in no business's interest to use substandard wages. You don't get good people. It's in no reputable business's interest to not abide by, OSHA requirements of good labor standards. I think this is a false argument that it is necessary to have this. And I mean, looking at PLAs, you talked about guaranteeing minority hiring and there are no consequences if you don't meet those goals, are there?
No, well, we'll go back to the monitoring and meeting the goals. We make sure all the goals are met. We monitor them and we make sure we write the language in the agreement. So when folks are referred from the union halls that we meet those requirements. I'll go back to the $1 million. The $1 million threshold triggers prevailing wage. I think you said PLAs, right? So the $1 million threshold in the major construction side triggers prevailing wage. And as I said earlier, there are a few good contractors out there that are not unionized contractors that pay a livable wage that are reputable, but there's no guarantee going forward that you're going to have the quality and the representation from the neighborhoods and including people on these jobs without a project labor agreement. We've had many municipalities or folks that are authorities that are looking to replicate what we do on project labor agreements, and they write goals into the jobs with the construction managers to try to duplicate what we do in the building trades. And they all fall flat on their face. And I'd be happy to share that information with you, Representative.
Okay.
We have it.
Okay, thank you. I suppose I'm just coming from wearing my other hat as ranking member of general law, where we're looking at bills that we're trying to improve apprentice ratios to give more people, more women, more people from communities of color, the opportunity to participate in the construction trades. And it is opposition from your unions that prevents increasing these opportunities. So I suppose I'm having trouble reconciling what you're telling this committee with what I heard in general law, where there was adamant and vocal opposition to increasing opportunities for those people whom you claim you want to help by changing the apprentice ratio. So I'm getting a real disconnect here, Joe. I hope you will appreciate my frustration.
No, I understand. I hear you loud and clearly. And as far as offering opportunity to disadvantaged folks, nobody offers more opportunity than the building trades. You're welcome to come. Nobody trains better. We train all the individuals for free that come into the local unions. It's at no cost. I think one of the misleading parts that we have to be careful about the apprentice ratios is we have to make sure these contractors are graduating these folks. So to continue to have a group of cheap labor when they're supposed to be trained and their graduation rate is dismal. So if an open shop contractor has a graduation rate from apprentice to journeyman at 20%, and they want more apprentices, they're not being used properly. We could give you the information on the unionized construction industry about our graduation rates on our apprentices. We're all for taking people in. We're all for taking people in disadvantaged folks, but we're not for people using the premise of apprentice to bring cheap labor in and not graduate them and move them up the ladder to become journey people. That's what we're concerned with.
Well, I'm sorry Representative Ackert isn't on this committee as well, because he takes a very different view and coming from the skilled trades. But thank you. We're getting somewhat off topic. I would just hope that as we move forward, that everyone in this committee looks at the things that are going to provide opportunities for everyone in this state to work, and not let a fixation on one particular aspect of the bill stop us moving forward in an industry that I think could have a very beneficial advantage on our state. So thank you so much, Joe, for your time. Thank you for your answers to my questions. And thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for Mr. Toner? Seeing none, Joe, thanks for being here today. And Representative Cabros-DeGraw, the con is yours.
Thank you so much. I see that Senator Summers has joined us again, and so we will go back to her for her testimony. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry about my technical freeze there earlier, but I am here tonight to testify in support of this bill. This is a bill that would afford Connecticut an opportunity to create a landscape to attract a new industry, which we desperately need for increasing jobs throughout our state, especially in this time of COVID. This would help really remove our reliance on the gaming industry and also defense that we are particularly dependent on here in the state of Connecticut. There's been a lot of testimony today, so I won't repeat things that other people have said, but I would encourage the committee to go look at what states like Ohio have done. John Kasich put in the largest data center. It's 1.8 million square feet. It's a $1 billion investment. It has generated all kinds of job opportunities in a town, New Albany, Ohio, that had really nothing available. In addition, they were able to negotiate things like apprenticeship programs and STEM investment in the local schools and communities. They've given scholarships. It's one of Facebook's largest hyperscale data center locations. Also look at Indiana, who has also been very successful in this. I also wanted to just touch base on a couple things. We heard about the timeline, the 30 years. The 30 years is an industry standard. If you look at the hyperscale data centers, if you don't have a 30-year agreement, most likely they won't come. They need that a long-term for the capitalization of the buildings. And also they enter into very long-term purchase power agreements. So the 30 years is really a crucial part. I do agree that municipalities can try to negotiate a shorter term agreement. I'm not sure if they would be successful moving forward, but if you look at it, 30 years really is, 30 years and above actually is the standard for the industry. I do think that as a former mayor of the town of Groton, that mayors are pretty resourceful, and they do have, usually are surrounded by very good legal teams that could help them negotiate a memorandum of understanding between a company and their town. I think that we should empower them to be able to do such. I do believe that there's opportunities for them to have flexibility, but I do think the term of the agreement is something that's really important. And you have to think about hyperscale data center needs four things. They need consistent energy, they need fiber, they need a no tax deal from a state, or else they just won't come. And then they also need land. So if you look at the opportunities in the areas in Connecticut that have land, in the surveys that I've done, pretty much from east of the river, of the Connecticut River, a lot of the towns have a lot of land that's just not being used. These particular hyperscale data centers, they don't have to have sewer. They can use gray water. They don't have to have the infrastructure that other buildings do. So they could be located in areas that are more rural, really helping some of these towns in their grand list and their opportunities for economic growth, where they really don't have that economic opportunity at this point in time. Talked about, if you look at, for example, if you Google, where Google has hyperscale data centers, they typically always put down a larger building that would house people that service the data center. Those would be taxable underneath this bill. And that's also a great opportunity for some higher wage earners and for our future students to be able to get into in this industry. Data is doubling every 18 months. It's amazing. All of our data doubling 18 months. There's not enough cloud space for us for storage. For example, Connecticut's hospitals, I believe all of their storage is in Indiana. So this is becoming an increasing need in our world and definitely in our country. And we are primarily located between between Boston and New York for the availability of hyperscale data centers. So I wanted to make sure that people knew that. I also wanted to make sure that people understand that there is ancillary businesses that can come off of this, spin-offs that come off of hyperscale data centers, and you see it in other states. Although this would be a no tax deal at the state level, I think it would be a great opportunity for municipalities to be able to negotiate pretty significant payments in lieu of property tax that they may never otherwise get on land that is just not being used. And that, coupled with the fact that they don't need a lot of help from the towns, they're not creating a situation where it's housing, which there would be then children that they would need to expand schools. They have their own security. They're very secure facilities. I think that this is a win-win for the state of Connecticut to be able to create the landscape for us to enter into a new industry that we have not had here yet in the state of Connecticut. So I wanted to leave you with, as a former mayor, if this had come to my town, I would have been very excited to look at this opportunity. Again, it's passive. If a town chooses that they don't want to move forward, they don't have to, but they do have an opportunity in hand and another tool to be able to create jobs in their area and help their grand list to move forward. So I'm happy to take any questions if anybody else has them, but I hope that you will consider this and maybe look at those other two states that have really been a model in what can be done for hyperscale data centers.
Okay, I am seeing no questions at this time, so thank you very much for that testimony. And we will be moving on to Fred Carstensen, please.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry, Representative Cheeseman, I missed you.
Oh, sorry, I got a late hand up. Thank you for coming today, Senator Summers. You mentioned the two states that are doing a particularly good job in developing these data centers. Are there elements of their programs that you think Connecticut should emulate that might not be in this current legislation?
Well, the information that I could find in the Ohio model it was interesting. They do have I believe it's a 20-year deal, but then they have an option for another 40 years to go forward for their no tax deal. They do not have a host agreement with the town. So the town is not getting anything as far as in lieu of property tax there in Ohio, but they have funded scholarships. They have put investments into the STEM program in the schools. So every state is different, but the one thing that is consistent through the states is they have to have fiber, energy, no tax, and they have to have the land. And without that, they don't come. It's a formula. So I think that there's an opportunity. I think this is actually going above and beyond what I've seen in other states as far as requiring this MOU with the town. Some of the different folks that I've had an opportunity to speak with, they have said, I know sewer and water keeps coming up a lot. Some of them had said that sewer and water would be something that they would be willing to take on as their utility costs. They would pay for that. That would be separate than what we're talking about in an MOU. But each town would have an ability to negotiate their own MOU. And I have great faith in our local leaders. They do a great job. If you look at how they are as far as their consistency in their budgets and their scrutiny of spending money, I have great faith that they would do a good job. And we heard from the commissioner that the DECD would be willing to help them if they felt overwhelmed by the ability to negotiate a memorandum of understanding going forward.
Okay, thank you. And I think you referenced, and you kindly pointed out the Ohio program to me earlier, that I think Facebook was making $190,000 contribution to the local county where they were located to improve STEM opportunities. And I think as well as you, as Mayor of Groton, and our friends in Norwich, looking at those municipalities with a municipal power system where they're consistently not only getting the possibility of lower rates where energy and cost of electricity are going to be critical, but also, as we've seen from recent storms, maybe a more reliable electricity source than if we're relying on the rest of our grid. So that's just my little aside. But thank you so much. I appreciate your passion. I know I share with you the desire to do more for our part of the state, Eastern Connecticut, which tends to be overlooked. And I think we offer some wonderful opportunities here for the kind of investment in infrastructure a data center would present. So thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your testimony. And thank you, our co-chairwoman, for allowing me to sneak back in. Thank you.
No problem. Okay, Senator Cohen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize. I had conflicting meetings as we're all trying to balance here. And so, Senator, I apologize to you if this isn't an appropriate question to you, but it sounds like you're pretty well versed on the bill and data centers in general. And I'm, as the Senate Chair of the Environment Committee, I have some concerns about the environmental impacts of data centers. Just wondering if you're aware of those environmental impacts and if you share any of those concerns. I know that as a state we have some renewable standards and goals to meet. We're looking to get to zero carbon. We've got some initiatives in place to do that. Obviously data centers use up massive amounts of energy and in turn create large amounts of carbon emissions. And we're talking about putting these in places that could be environmental justice areas, also an initiative that we've worked hard on. So I just wondered if you have any thoughts on that, and if you're aware, and if there's anything we can do. I have spoken briefly with Commissioner Lehman about this. I'm sorry that I missed his testimony, but looking forward, is there something we can do to incentivize these data centers to be using renewables as a source of energy rather than creating large amounts of carbon emissions?
Well, thank you for that question. I am aware that they use a lot of energy. That is correct. I do think that, we're only going to be able to expand or have hyperscale data centers if we can provide enough energy to them. Obviously we're not going to be having 25 data centers in one town. The energy is not there to support that. I do not think it is something that renewable energy could power right now. I don't see how that is possible. They need, energy that they would be entering into a purchase power agreement with, whether it be Eversource or, one of the municipal electric companies. And it would probably be a long-term agreement. They do have to have backup generation on site because they cannot go down. I know that they've had these conversations with the commissioner of DEEP. And she has been in many conversations with them in the governor's office. And obviously they've come to agreement because the governor is behind this bill. As far as moving forward, what I can tell you is that the information that I've learned on the data centers, if a developer creates the data center building, the people going inside that are leasing the building or perhaps buy the building, somebody like Facebook or Google, they are all committed to being carbon neutral. And I believe that they're going to strive for that. But as far as the actual data center itself, and I'm not sure about what you said previously, looking to place them in an environmental area that you said something about environmental justice area. I'm not sure that they know exactly where they would be going. I think that they've looked at different areas throughout the state of Connecticut, but I don't think that there has been any decisions at this point definitely made on where they would locate or if they could locate. And they're still required to meet all the local permitting and state permitting requirements as far as placing a building in a certain area. Again, they use gray water. I know that many of them want to stay away from any environmentally sensitive area. But as far as incentives, I think that we would have to have a further conversation with them going forward. I would like to say one thing, that they buy a lot of the energy in the day after market. So they're using energy that no one else has picked up. So that will help. And obviously, if they can use this X amount of energy, they will enter into these long-term contracts. That consistency and that larger purchase of energy will help reduce energy costs overall for everybody else. And I'm sure that they will talk to that as you go further in the day.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other hands, last call. We will move on to Fred Carstensen, please.
Thank you.
Fred, are you there? You need to unmute if you are.
This is Tom, just to chime in. He's on his phone, so he should be hearing us.
Okay.
Let's see. Let's give him a second.
I just unmuted him, so let's see if he got that.
There. It tells me I'm unmuted now.
Yes, you're good. Thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having this hearing. This is a very important bill. I want to contextualize this because it's extremely important that people understand that we're the worst performing state economy in the nation since 2008. And that's a bad performance by a wide margin. Our economy shrank 9.1% in real terms. We were creating jobs that were low wage and low income jobs. We were losing high wage, high income jobs, many of them actually associated with data intensive areas because of our weakness in IT in general. We've had a modest recovery, but in February 2020, before the COVID, we were 6% smaller than we had been at our previous peak. We were about where we were in 2006. Our recent economic growth rate has been 0.6%. That is, say, less than 1%. It's been one of the slowest state recoveries, state growth rates in the country. If we don't change the trajectory, our projections are at the Center for Economic Analysis that Connecticut will only recover to where it was in 2006 in 2030. So, let that sink in. And then you put that in the context of state budgets. Our projections are that if we don't change the trajectory, we will exhaust all of the rainy day fund, and we will pretty much use the federal relief funds up probably by fiscal 24. And then we're going to have very, very serious deficits going forward. And we need to get out of this framework that we're currently in. And I've often framed this as saying that Connecticut, which we just had an incredibly robust economy, enormous job creation and growth in the 1980s. We had as much as 21,000 annual building permits. We're now below 5,000. And then in the 1990s, after the very, very bad recession that we had in the early 90s, we actually had, on a per capita basis, the strongest growing economy in the country. We weren't creating many jobs, as you remember. But in fact, our economy was growing very robustly. And those of you that have been here for a while will know that we had $5 billion in surpluses during the Rowland and Rell administrations. So we were a very strong economy. Arguably, we were number one up until 2008. And now we're number 50. We just fell off the cliff. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is that we disconnected from the data-driven, digitally dependent modern economy. And that's very much what this bill, looks to correct. So that's number one, is just broadly, we need to get very serious about economic development strategies and initiatives. And this is one of the most important bills, I think, that addresses that. The second point I wanted to make is that this is exactly the kind of bill we should have. It is a policy framework that applies to every company that is interested in this. We did a wonderful deal with United Technologies, now Raytheon, of course, but it kept Pratt & Whitney in the state on a 15-year commitment. It permitted them to rebuild their very important World Research Headquarters in East Hartford, and it anchored them here because we emphasized the physical building. And the Middletown Pratt & Whitney facility installed the first ever moving assembly line for the construction of engines enormous productivity impacts. I mean, it's extraordinarily important. And it's something, of course, that they're not going to move. It's there. So it was a great transaction, but that's also the problem, is we didn't offer that to any other company in Connecticut. And we made every other manufacturing company angry at Connecticut because it was not a policy. It was a transaction. The same thing went with Bridgewater down in Stamford. We did a very good deal with them to keep them here. Very important, extremely important. But it was a deal. It was a transaction. It was not a policy. I actually talked to somebody who is very important, Connecticut native, in the hedge fund venture capital. And she said to this day, everybody that she knows is angry about the Bridgewater deal because it wasn't a policy. We should do what other states do is they have policies. Any company interested in a particular sector, bioscience.
Just a heads up, we're coming up on 3
IT.
minutes here. 3-minute warning.
Okay, so this is exactly the kind of policy. Third thing is, this is a very powerful co-location driver. It's not just the directive benefits that it will create. It will create significant net new jobs. It will, but it will also, because moving data is very slow. You want to be close to your data. And the thing is also that it makes us competitive, and you've heard from other people. Now, just 2 quick comments. There was an earlier comment about the importance of fiber. We have 25,000 miles of some of the best fiber anywhere in North America. In fact, it's entirely competitive with the fiber optic system on which Governor Kasich based his expansion in Ohio. It's called SEND. It's under a federal mandate for open access. It has never been implemented. It is almost unutilized by the private sector, despite that stipulation when we got the $150 million in federal money. 2,500 miles of some of the best fiber in North America, and we don't use it for the private sector. Only one data center of the 17 in the state is connected to it. The second thing is that, and incidentally, Ohio has exactly the same kind of thing. It started as the public sector fiber optic system. The federal funding gave it the 100G speed, which is the fastest speed anywhere in the world, same thing that we have, but they pushed it for the open, they fulfilled the open access mandate that they agreed to with the federal government and made it the basis of the Northern Ohio, Cleveland area fiber optic.
Okay, Fred, we do need to summarize here so we can get to questions, okay?
Well, let me ask one other thing. The largest single investor in renewables in the globe is Jeff Bezos, is Amazon, AWS, Google, and Microsoft are all already zero emission, carbon emission in terms of the scale of purchases that they have made of carbon credits. At this point, they have fully offset, but they are also making major investments in both building renewables and in developing the technologies on renewables. So it's an industry that is entirely consistent with Connecticut's commitment to renewables.
Okay, thank you very much. Representative Devlin.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Fred, thank you for your comments. I have to say they were a little bit sobering in terms of your initial depiction of the state of our state. And I don't know that that's any big surprise to anybody, but you certainly spelled that out very clearly. And I appreciate your comments as well about the positive aspect of this legislation being policy versus transactions or deals. And our commissioner, who I have a great deal of respect for, has stated multiple times he's kind of anti-incentive. So this sort of policy, I think, is positive as well. And we've had a lot of discussion throughout this morning, with potential barriers or opportunities, be they environmental, be they energy, be they labor, whatever it might be. But in your introductory comments, you made mention of two things, and I don't want to take us on a different track, but I think it's related, and I'd like for you to expound on them. You said that we need to change the trajectory of our state and get out of the framework that we are operating in. Clearly, we went on to talk about the data economy and how that's an opportunity, but can you just expound on what you meant by those two statements a little bit further?
Yeah, just very simply, this is all I think very well known. Following 2008, virtually all of our job creation, and there's a McKinsey study that outlined this very graphically that the Business Council of Fairfield County had put together, is our jobs were in all low-wage areas, logistics, tourism, hospitality, elder care. None of them pay more than about $35,000 a year if you actually manage to work full-time. Almost none of those industries, in fact, are characterized by full-time work. In logistics, for instance, you're usually on call, and you can go in and work at an Amazon logistics center, which and Amazon now has several million feet of warehouse capacity in Connecticut. But after 4 hours, they may send you home. Because you only go to work for as long as there are orders to fill. And it's one of the reasons, incidentally, that our income tax revenue has declined so dramatically in Connecticut relative to total household income. I've done that analysis, and it's pretty dramatic. Because lower income households obviously don't pay. At the same time as the McKinsey thing outlined, we were systematically losing jobs in the $80,000 to $100,000. We've lost almost a third of our finance and insurance sector in terms of employment. In fact, the fastest growing sector we have in the state, which was the fifth, it was only fifth in terms of size, is the information sector, which is actually arguably the most important sector in the modern economy. It's grown in the value of output. It's shrunk in the terms of employment, direct employment. And generally, Joe Toner was talking about how our people have had to go out of state. We have lost thousands of plumbers, electricians, building craftspeople over the last 30 years. All of the tradescrafts, when I used to live in Bloomfield, Connecticut, every single one of them had moved out of state because there weren't the jobs here anymore. And they were always having to travel out of state to stay employed. All of our surrounding states fully recovered from 2008. And I did occupational breakdown. And what's really striking is the occupations specifically associated with IT, not just in the information sector, but the data managers at a Travelers or at a Pratt & Whitney. Or at a Sikorsky. I mean, they all are very data intensive. They have sensors on their, say at Pratt & Whitney, their sensors on all the engines. They collect exabytes of data on a daily basis. All of them had robust double-digit growth. Nationally, the growth rate was around 50%. All of our neighboring states, even Rhode Island, had very strong growth. And Connecticut just wasn't there. We had I'm trying to remember the specific number, but it was like about 4%. I mean, it was just non-existent. It was like we just fell off the cliff in terms of the modern economy. And it's precisely, we did not take data centers importantly. I mentioned, and you've talked about it earlier, we have 17 data centers in Connecticut. They're all very small. The single largest data center in Boston is larger than all of our data centers put together. And so, we just didn't stay relevant to where the modern economy is going. And we need to change that trajectory. We need to change that dynamic. And this one offers a tremendous array of opportunities. Joe talked about it. It's not just the construction, incidentally, the continuing operation of these centers requires regular help, maintenance from plumbers and electricians and other construction craft people. You're switching out the servers every 3 years. They need regular attendance. We've looked at some of the analysis at other areas in terms of sort of what the daily process is of the people. They aren't direct employee. They're not employed by the data center. They're contractors who come in on a regular basis to deal with all of the kinds of issues that these very complex, extremely expensive buildings require. And so he was talking about the training, and that's a sustained basis, and that's one of the things that all this activity creates additional revenue, and we've begun to do some very good work in the Eastern Connecticut training programs that have been helping to provide skilled workers for electric boat, for instance. Clearly, we've got the governor's workforce development council, and it's looking exactly at these kinds of things, and we need to coordinate the development of these high-tech demanding sectors, with our skill sets. You can think it is, obviously I'm talking very broadly, but one of the great things that Jackson Labs has done is they've worked with Central Connecticut to develop a special curriculum to train people who can come to work at Jackson Labs, who can come to work in the genomic research. And so the education workforce pipeline, not just for high school and college students, but also for adults, is something to which we need to give attention. And the development of something like this is a great motivation to create exactly that kind of a pipeline.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you expounding on that. I do think that it would bring a lot of opportunity, particularly in construction trades, whether it's union or non-union work. I think fair competition is a good thing. And I think we lose sight sometimes of those other ancillary aspects that you talked about. It's sort of like when we lost the GE headquarters in Fairfield. That was a great thing to be able to say that we had, but you also think about the investments in the community, the contributions to philanthropy of corporations that like to be good corporate citizens and support the communities with which they're based, the people that maintain the facility, all of the other ancillary services that contribute to our economy. So I appreciate you expanding on that some more for me, and thank you. I appreciate your comments today.
I'm glad to be here.
Sorry, Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today, Professor Carstensen. Question, you mentioned that Ohio followed the open access mandate with regard to their high-speed fiber optic. Can you just explain what that is, please?
If you recall, Governor Rell very smartly said, we have to create a fiber optic network for our public sector. For libraries, city governments, and so on. And that started as what was called the Nutmeg Network. And as part of the Obama Recovery Initiative, they offered to fund states expanding their public networks dramatically, but with a stipulation that they had to become open access. That is, they could no longer be restricted just to the private sector. To the public sector. And I remember vividly, I actually worked with the engineer who was responsible for CEN. That's our Connecticut Education Network, which is what Nutmeg transitioned into CEN. And learning about what an extraordinarily high quality system it is. And Connecticut and Ohio were the two states that actually got the largest federal grants to upgrade their systems to 100G. That's the fastest commercially available speed. And I am told when Governor Kasich looked at this and the subsidy that Ohio was providing to its network, he actually said, we're going to cross it out. And then the people came in and explained to him what it was. 6 months later, on the back page, the entire back page of the Wall Street Journal was an ad about Ohio offering the highest speed fiber optic network available to the private sector anywhere in North America. It was identical to what we have in Connecticut. It was the basis for K6 economic development strategy for Northern Ohio, and focused on biomedical, advanced manufacturing. Sound familiar? It's a mirror image of Connecticut in terms of where they thought their competitive advantage was, and increasingly in data intensive. So they made their public fiber optic system the center of their competitive strategy for economic development and high quality, high value added economic activity. We're under the same legal requirement of open access. If you look at utilization in SEN, it has virtually no private sector. It is almost entirely, and they list publicly those that are using SEN. It's entirely either public agencies or nonprofits. And I know that Senator Osteen have talked a little bit, is one of the big struggles in Connecticut had been that we didn't address the issue of the last mile. The one data center that actually is connected to SEN, as I understand it, he actually hired his own backhoe because he knew where it was located, and he got permission to connect. But their business, I don't know that I've only recently really begun to look at this very closely because the question came up about the quality of our fiber optic network, and the governor has made it. And so I began casting about and saying, all right, so, but don't we already have a lot? We have a lot of, in fact, there's a lot of dark fiber in the ground because we had an enormous construction of fiber optic networks 15 years ago, and then the companies went bankrupt. And I recently learned from Connecticut Water, they occasionally, in installing facilities, will dig up fiber optic cable and nobody knows to whom it belongs. I have not been able to find anybody who actually has a map of the dark fiber optic cable that exists in Connecticut, which apparently is quite extensive. I do know that SEN is 2,500 miles of fiber optic cable already in the ground and very high quality, and not widely connected. And that's something I can't give you better detail on it, except that from what I understand, there is the open access requirement, but it's never been incorporated into their business management. It's not something that the legislature has given any, to which the legislature has given any attention. There has not been a productive discussion. And that's part of this whole neglect of the importance of IT, which goes back literally 15 years. I mean, it was like, we were an enormously successful state, and we were. And somehow we didn't think we had to be proactive, that sort of things would take care of themselves. Well, they didn't. And we need to become proactive in smart ways. And this is a great bill. Let me get back to that, because it's low-hanging fruit. It doesn't cost us anything. We're not putting any money on the table. This isn't, and we're not foregoing future revenue. I mean, a lot of economic development is good policy. It's not simply throwing incentives on the ground in terms of actually putting money out, saying like we did with the Groton World Research Headquarters. Historically, we had this thing, we would subsidize jobs. The smartest thing we've done is like with United Technologies or with Jackson Labs. We incentivize major capital projects, and that anchors companies here. Jack's Lab isn't going to leave. It's got a $200 million specialized research building. It can't take the building with it. You know, Pratt & Whitney is not going to leave. It's got a $200 million research facility in East Hartford. It's got 2,000 engineers and scientists who live here in Connecticut. It's got a fantastic workforce in Middletown with a $100 million specialized factory. They aren't going to leave. The smart thing is exactly this kind of bill, is you say, for a new industry, come build in Connecticut. And once you've built here, you're going to stay here. And of course, the 30-year is just the standard. You know, there have been some people who said, you know, let's get super competitive and make it, you know, even longer. But 30 years is the minimum that you have to put on the table, because these are, you know, they're not moving. You know, once they're here, once you've invested $500 million in a facility, you know, you want to get full use out of it over its useful lifetime.
Sure, that's
at least 25, 30 years.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it's anchor them here.
Right. Quickly, so in incentivizing the development of industries and smart policy, you mentioned Jackson Labs creating the training pipeline for the people who need to work there. You kindly mentioned our Eastern Workforce Investment Board. When we're talking about creating these policies to encourage industry, do you think we should be looking to the industries as well to help us in that workforce development, to requiring more of a commitment from them to partner with the state to develop the workers that we need?
Oh, I think that absolutely has to be on the table. I was thinking in part of this discussion, we were very much involved with EDS, the Electronic Data Systems, which was one of the bidders under Governor Rowland. It was actually the first job I had as director of the Center for Economic Analysis, which tells you how long I've been working on this issues. And EDS, as part of their bid, said, we will create a special curriculum in Waterbury and for the juniors and seniors, and everybody who finishes that curriculum will be guaranteed a job at EDS. We will create in Willimantic an adult training program to bring people into the computer science data analytics industry that EDS was in, which it was a major player. And I think they had I think there were 3 human capital development programs, because it's in their interest to have a pipeline that would assure them the quality workforce that they needed. It's other states have been very aggressive about this in terms of working with industry to say, you know, help us create the appropriate curricular framework to train people for your thing. And I know one company that actually is headquartered in Connecticut, but they were building they're developing a facility in Virginia. And it wasn't that they were taking some out of Connecticut. It was a very specifically to support their local market in that region. But Virginia collaborated with them and set up a facility that actually used their equipment and had a curriculum that they had co-developed, so that people in that program, you know, literally had worked on the specific machinery that they would have to operate when they went to work for this company. And South Carolina has done the similar kinds of things. The biggest BMW factory in the world is actually in South Carolina. It's not in Germany. 40% of the cars.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. Yes. Right. Don't get me going.
Yeah, I know. I'm aware of what the southern states have done to work with auto manufacturers. And one final question, if I may.
Absolutely. No. It's got to be on the table. It's enormously important.
Right. Okay. Great. Well, we're on the same page there. And as you talk about the importance of policy, and as we're looking at those policy initiatives, one, as you'll be aware, is to put forward a public option. We have 47,000 insurance companies in the state. Do you think, as we look at policy, you know, for all its worthwhile goals, that consideration of the effect it's going to have on the business climate and the employment should be a consideration that we take into account?
Oh, I'm I'm all in favor. I'm on holistic analysis. When we do studies, we always try to do them holistically. What are all of the kind of impacts? And the reason we use the tools that we do at CCEA is precisely because they give us that ability to look at all of the kind of interactions. So our analysis is net. That is to say, we look at when you have a new industry arrive, like the Native American casinos in Eastern Connecticut, they pull labor away from other activities. So you can't just say all that they add. You also have to say how much do they take away from other industries. So you have to do it on a net basis, and we're very careful to do it on a net basis. And something like these data centers, as I said earlier, they're extraordinarily important for co-location. All those insurance companies, all our financial services companies, you know, they have intense data needs, and they need to be located where they can use it. You mentioned this horrifying thing that we have. We're relying on data centers in Nebraska, in Iowa. I mean, you know, and it's very expensive. It's very costly, and it's very slow. And you know, you want to be physically co-located. And what you end up doing, you know, why is so much of travelers move to Des Moines, Iowa? What does Des Moines, Iowa have? It's just next to one of the biggest Amazon data centers, because you want to be co-located. Data moves slowly. So physically, you want to be co-located with it. And the more data that we get, the more important it becomes to be co-located.
Okay,
Simple as
thank
that.
you. Thank you so much. Thank you very much for your answers, Professor, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Chavy, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Professor Carstensen. I had a question. You mentioned a data center in Boston that has as much capacity as every data center in our state. Does Massachusetts have a similar incentive policy as the one that this bill would create?
I don't know. I looked at that a few years ago when we were doing some other work looking at and I was just trying to figure out why it was, and it was, I really admired much of the work that Catherine Smith did, but she had this attitude that data centers weren't important because they didn't create a lot of direct jobs, which I've said is a little bit like telling me that you don't think we should have roads because once you've built them, they don't create a lot of jobs. And so I had looked at that, the specific issue of thing. I was only looking at sort of the regional thing. There's a lot of data there. SEC has a requirement for a financial services company to have real off-site backup. And so Northern New Jersey has a lot of data centers. It has high power costs. It's not a great place to locate them because New Jersey does not have the kind of incentives that other states have. But that's driven by the by the legal requirements, because the technology means that those backup real-time data centers have to be within 122 miles of where the transactions actually take place. A lot of the stuff in Boston has been driven by biotech, because the big driver in the extraordinary Boston metro economic growth has been around biotech, and that's there's computational genomics is a hugely important area, and that's the driver, and they needed to have the facilities there. But it's also not a great place. I mean, we would have to go back and talk with David. I haven't looked closely at it. I've known what the national pattern is. I think there are 32 states that have this 30-year framework to attract data centers. And as already been mentioned, Ohio and Indiana have been the most aggressive.
Do you think this bill is sufficient to attract this industry to Connecticut?
I think it's a very good bill from what I've seen of it, and I think we know that there's this real interest in the financial transactions. I know that there are a couple of companies that have are extremely interested. One of the things that hasn't been given a lot of attention in our discussions here is a thing called latency, which is the speed with which you can transmit data. Computers are much faster at analyzing the data than the system is at moving the data. IBM actually discovered this because they found that the super fast computer was actually sitting idle about 2/3 of the time because it couldn't get the data in fast enough because the data was located too far away. Connecticut has very low latency to Boston and New York. We are enormously competitive against locations in Ohio or Indiana or Nebraska or Iowa because our speeds are as little as much as 15% of what the speeds are, and the speed is important. So our latency is very good, and if we can address the power problem, and I understand that early explorations have found a way, given the scale of demand, because in economics we have the importance of scale effects, that we can be competitive with a lot of locations in terms of power costs. One of the great things is, as Commissioner Lehman said, this is, we're just laying the framework, and the companies are going to have to negotiate the power agreements. The state's not going to do that for them, and we're going to have to let the market work. But at least we're going to get a framework that we think will make us competitive, and it would have, if we win on this, it would be a huge win for the state of Connecticut, for the government. I mean, the amount of net new tax revenue that the Connecticut would get would be significant. It would be clearly a significant win for our construction professionals. It would be, in the data centers, I think it would be a great win for our educational system in terms of a focused opportunity. So, I think Commissioner Lehman has done a very good job, and I very much like Randy
on
Collins'
5 minutes here.
comments. But Randy Collins made some very good comments about how to, massage this to create a night. And as I think was commented, we're doing a much better job framing this to benefit local communities than other states have done, without undermining the incentives to come to Connecticut. And so to me, it's a well-crafted bill.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. And seeing no other hands, that ends your testimony for today. Thank you very much. Next up, we have Anders Franzen. He will be our last speaker today.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the committee for allowing me to appear before you today to discuss this very important legislation. My name is Anders Franzen, and I'm here today in 2 capacities. First, as the General Counsel of Members Exchange, or MEMEX. MEMEX recently launched its U.S. Equities Exchange. MEMEX was founded by a diverse group of market participants to create positive competition in the exchange space and to provide a voice for our members on market structure issues. We are headquartered in New Jersey. Second, I'm here as a director of the Coalition to Prevent the Taxing of Retirement Savings, which is comprised of the major U.S. equities exchanges, the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, CBOE, IEX, and MEMEX, in addition to major brokerage firms, market makers, and data centers. The coalition was formed in the fall of 2020 to educate legislators about the negative impacts of imposing a state financial transaction tax. Preliminarily, I wish to state for the record that we strongly believe that financial transaction taxes are bad policy, as they increase costs and lower returns for individual investors, consistently underperform compared to revenue generation projections, increase volatility, harm capital markets, and damage economic growth by decreasing revenues and jobs. With this backdrop, I'm happy to speak to you today about the refreshing counterview the state of Connecticut is considering in the form of the proposed legislation. With respect to the modern day infrastructure, as has been said earlier, and as I'm sure you know, New Jersey currently occupies a central role in American markets. While trading once primarily occurred on exchange floors in major cities like New York City and Chicago, billions of products are now dealt with through computers housed in data centers around the world. That includes several data centers in northern New Jersey that are used by our exchange, as well as the other major US stock exchange operators. As a result of threatened legislation originally proposed in New Jersey and now gaining traction in New York, members of the financial services industry have been working together in their search for a new collective home that can provide reassurances that a statewide FTT will not be imposed. Any state FTT would immediately provide competitive advantages to some and disadvantages to others. Given that broker-dealers have best execution obligations and are obligated to route their orders to the location where they can obtain the best price for their customers, if one state imposes a tax and another does not, any exchange located in the state with a tax would have to pass it along to end investors and simultaneously become non-competitive when it comes to executing trades. Conversely, those not impacted by the tax would become more competitive, would be able to quickly increase their business with customers who are seeking better executions, either for themselves or because required to do so pursuant to regulation. That competitive dynamic would leave those impacted by the tax with no choice but to move. Over the past few months, the coalition has had many fruitful discussions with states interested in incentivizing the industry to move, given the hundreds of millions of dollars of economic activity at stake. Members of the coalition have talked to the states of Texas, Florida.
3-minute warning.
Thank you. Georgia, Nebraska, and others, each of which is actively encouraging us to consider the benefits of moving to their state. Initially, the coalition did not expect Connecticut to make a competitive pitch. We were surprised by the compelling presentation by Governor Lamont, Commissioner Lehman, and other members of the governor's staff. However, for any state to be truly on the short list for members of the coalition, we need to know that we're not going to be moving again in 5 years. We're in the process of evaluating different states based on a number of factors, such as power cost, weather risk, infrastructure, workforce, and other factors. That said, given the massive investment we expect to make to relocate, I believe the number one criteria for us is to be comfortable that we will not face the same issue in the future. While I cannot speak on behalf of the coalition as a whole or deliver a decisive response now as to whether, where, or when we will move, I'm confident in saying that if Connecticut passes legislation, the number one criteria for our decision-making process will have been addressed. Thank you for your time, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Representative Chafee. Oh, I'm sorry, Representative Cheeseman.
Thank you. I have to be quicker with my raised hand function. Thank you very much for coming today, Anders. Can you just give us, it may be hard because I know we're talking huge numbers, but the financial impact of financial transactions tax would have not only on the exchanges, but let's say, you know, I'm looking to someone to make trades. How would this play out in your view? Because obviously this is a major concern.
Sure. So there have been various financial transaction taxes proposed. And so I'll speak in generalities without, you know, rather than any specific one that's been on the table. But there are various estimates out there that there would certainly be an impact on the industry participants directly, major market makers, et cetera. But really, we want to focus the legislators' attention on the fact that it's individual investors that would suffer through a financial transaction tax. People saving for their retirements, people who are invested in the stock market, those are ultimately the people who will bear the brunt of this cost. They'll bear it through increased cost of transacting. They'll also see diminished returns over time for those invested in mutual funds or various portfolios that rebalance over time. Every time that portfolio rebalances, you would bear the brunt of this cost. And so, there are various studies. There are some great studies out there that have estimated that a financial transaction tax could increase the time it takes someone to save for their retirement to reach their goals of up to 2.5 years. So I think the tax is significant. It's real, and ultimately would be borne by individual investors.
Okay, thank you. And currently, I know we talked about New Jersey and New York. Do other states impose a financial transactions tax?
They do not currently, but those are really the states that are at issue now, given where most of our operations are located. The state of Illinois has historically, there have been proposals, but it has never been enacted. And obviously, the state of Illinois also has a substantial amount of financial services located there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you very much for your answers, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Chafee, followed by Representative Meskers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for speaking with us today. You mentioned that the financial transaction tax, they do not generate the predicted revenue, but then you also said that nobody has implemented it. So I was just curious how a tax that has not been implemented doesn't meet predictions.
Sure. There's a lot of case studies that have been done actually around the globe. So while transaction tax hasn't been in place in the US for quite some time, there was one in New York a very long time ago. But in our modern markets in the US, there's not been a financial transaction tax. There have been financial transaction taxes imposed in countries like Sweden, in France, and others. And the studies from those cases are that ultimately trading moves elsewhere, the market is disrupted, companies suffer, investors suffer, and the location ultimately doesn't collect the tax that they set out to collect. And in fact, in most cases, they ultimately roll back the tax, realizing the error of their ways. So it's more, there are various historical studies of international financial transaction taxes.
Do you know off the top of your head what was New Jersey's proposed tax rate?
I don't know the particular rate off the top of my head. However, I would say, there were various iterations of the proposal. At one point, they were seeking to recoup as much as $10 billion a year. At later points, it was a much lower rate that would have raised approximately $1 billion a year.
1 billion with a B or million with an M?
With a B.
Okay. Because I was just looking up, it says it's 1/4 cent per transaction. I'm not a wealthy person by any means. I have purchased stock in the past. 1/4 penny per transaction. I fail to see how that's going to impact a retail investor or someone saving for retirement.
Sure. If you were buying a single stock and holding it for a long period of time, that may be true. However, it would affect the price of getting into that stock, because the market ultimately, we think, will be disrupted, and people will not, the same liquidity won't be available in the market at the same prices. But putting that aside for a moment, there's a significant impact to mutual funds, and again, any sort of a position that rebalances over time, where an investor and a lot of retail investors and individual investors are investing in those types of products.
I know recently in the stock market, there's been a lot of news around, wild speculation. Isn't part of the philosophy behind one of these taxes that it'll slow speculation and kind of reduce bubbles that get produced in the market?
That has been stated by some. Of course, you could imagine that we strongly disagree with that speculation, with that line of thinking, that ultimately that's not the place for financial transaction tax, that it would ultimately do more harm than good, and that it's not necessary to deal with any of those recent events.
All right, thank you for your time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, Representative Neskers, please.
Thank you. Mr. Franzen, I guess the question at hand is the structure of a incentive or clearing the tax issue and liability for you to consider locating your operation in the state of Connecticut, and with the opportunity space for co-location. So I guess the question on the taxation and financial transaction tax is ultimately a question which will feed into your decision on where you want to locate this type of activity, right? Now, as an exchange, so sorry about that. So the location of the activity obviously or the location of potential tax is going to affect your decision on where you're considering to make this significant and substantial investment for the proximate up to 30 years and potentially longer, right? That I just want to clarify that that's what one of your concerns with this financial tax, right?
That's absolutely right.
So on the issue on the state basis, an imposition there, I guess the ancillary questions would be, not only would it have a negative impact on exchanges, but people who decide to manage the investments from the state of Connecticut versus from out of state. So there could be an ancillary concern about a financial transaction tax driving financial activity outside the state. So it's not just, while you're focused on convincing us to put your investment in our state, which I salute, I think a financial transaction tax, the question is, do you ring fence the money and capture the tax, or do you find the money runs offshore? I worked in banking and Wall Street and the emerging markets for 30 years, where people chased financial transaction taxes, and the activity began to move offshore. The corollary here is that's what you're in the stasis of trying to figure out relative to New York and New Jersey, where if it's not a federal tax, which is a whole different problem, and I'm sure you're not an advocate, questions at the local level, does it make sense for you to consider someplace that's going to make you subject to that, or make it uneconomical for you to invest and make the infrastructure investment? Is that correct?
Sure. Yes, and that's a great question. I think the point here, there have been these proposed taxes, and in the state of New Jersey, it's actually relatively easy to focus on that for the legislators there, given the data center concentration and the fact that the majority of exchange activity and even off-exchange activity is indeed conducted through servers located in northern New Jersey. So there they had a clear target, but ultimately what's different today than was even maybe a decade or two ago is that while those servers need to be located close to each other, they don't necessarily need to be located close to New York or any other particular geography. They just need to be close to each other. And so while we need to figure out the right place to be, I guess it's wrong to think that we need to be in this particular location. Another point, in the state of New York, things are different, where actually most of the final transactions aren't occurring. However, as you would imagine, many of the touch points of a transaction are through counterparties that are in some way or another located in New York or have some nexus to New York. So in that instance, while I'll take my firm, for instance, as an example, we're not located in New York. We're located in New Jersey. Our servers are in New Jersey. If New York were to do this, ultimately, we would be at a competitive advantage, and the New York Stock Exchange, NASDAQ, and others that have a huge nexus to New York and are taxpayers there would be at a disadvantage. And ultimately, they would have to figure out how to deal with that situation. So,
and ultimately, both the insurance and mutual fund industry would have to figure
exactly right. Exactly right. And to your point with Connecticut, of course, there are a number of financial firms located there. And so if Connecticut were to pursue a financial transaction tax, it would be specifically disadvantaging those businesses that are located there and almost incentivizing them to find a different home.
All right. Well, thank you very much. That's informative into my decision making. Having been on Wall Street and working in Fairfield County, or living in Fairfield County, I think my interest is anything I can do to move the growth of the state. So providing a framework of an opportunity space to grow the construction industry, to grow the financial industry, in parts other than Fairfield, quite frankly, to get the northeastern part of the state into the servers and get the co-locations and fill that corridor with business opportunity would be certainly something I would look forward to. So I'd be happy if we get through the legislation that we could sit and talk at some point from that point of view, what else we could accomplish. And thank you.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, thank you very much for your testimony today. That does conclude our public hearing. Just a reminder that tomorrow morning at 9:30, we do have our Finance Committee meeting. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chair.